Hey everyone, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy the audiobooks, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you'd like to support us further, consider becoming a Patreon member. As a member, you'll gain the ability to request the next part of a novel audiobook I've uploaded, depending on your Patreon tier.
There was only one opening that I could exploit to attack. A moment when the enemy would be too preoccupied with Leon to bother with me. The chance came and I took it. I wasn't ashamed of my actions. Reaping the rewards of another's effort. I chose the easiest and least dangerous path. I was sure Leon wouldn't mind me doing this. But he's still standing. It appeared as though the enemy was still standing. Was that strike not good enough? I didn't hesitate to approach him from behind. A burning sensation coursed through my forearm, causing me to pause right behind him. In that brief instant, I glimpsed a miniature magic circle hovering at the tips of his fingers, directed towards Leon. Even now, in such a state he was. Why is he so desperate? I pressed my hand against his shoulder, and the world turned dark shortly after. Ah! A medium-sized room. That was how the world appeared to me. What is going on? My body floated as I looked around. It didn't seem like a vision. I felt in complete control, and while I couldn't speak, I could look around and move just fine. You're finally awake. Then, I heard a voice. A woman sat by the bed where a man rested. There were 3 other people beside the man. 2 boys and a girl. They appeared to be young, in their early teens. When did they get here? Who are you? Where am I? A familiar face. He was younger, but it was without a doubt him. Professor Bucklam. What is this? Ah. Father. Dad. Information entered my mind at that moment. A time when an incident occurred and he sustained heavy injuries, forgetting all about his memories. He woke up to find that he was married and had 3 children. A famed wizard with several groundbreaking theses to his name. That was who he was and how the world knew him as. Who are you people? Why are you looking at me like that? And why? He squeezed his heart. Emotions I hadn't expected flooded my mind. It was a familiar emotion, and my heart squeezed briefly. Is my chest like this? Familial love. Even as his memories faded, his emotions hadn't. The unfamiliar people in front of him. He still cared deeply for them. It was hence why he was able to push through the confusion and live a normal life. Because he loved them. Robert, eat this. Is it to your tastes? Dad, try it. It's your favorite. We made it for you. Ah, yes. Warmth. It felt warm. That was us when we first met. It was a sunny day and you approached me all nervous. But that warmth. How long could it truly last? That's the photo we took when Natalie was born. That's Jason. The photos. They were familiar and yet unfamiliar. It warmed his heart to see, but also brought emptiness. The person in the photo. It was him, and yet he felt unfamiliar. Was this really him? How long do you think it'll take for him to recover his memories? It shouldn't take too long. He suffered severe head trauma. The doctor casually said while looking through a series of documents. It would take at most a year for him to get them back. You hear that, Robert? His wife smiled at him. Relief was evident in her expression. You're going to get your memories back. Yes. He smiled back at her. But his heart didn't. Is the previous me that much better? His children thought so. Dad, when are you going to get your memories back? Every day. I miss you, Dad. They'd ask the same question. When can we have our dad back? When was he going to come back? Am I not good enough? Such thoughts ate at his mind every day. Why was it that he had forgotten his memories about them, but not his feelings? It wouldn't have hurt so much if that was the case. And it was also because of such feelings that he'd pray to himself every day. I love them. They don't love me. It's because I love them that I must go. Let me disappear. Let him come back. For them. You must come back. I stared blankly at the sight in front of me. What is this? The feelings. Everything that he felt. They were so vivid in my mind. The pain, the love, and everything that went through his mind. I experienced it all. Gradually. It was starting to become unbearable. He carried on such pain every day. Doctor. Are you sure everything is okay? It's been a year and he's still. I'm just as stumped, Madam Bucklam. I was brought back by a certain conversation. So when can I expect him to recover? I'm not sure. The difficult expression of the doctor and the pained expression on his wife's face. It ate away at his mind. I'm trying. I really am. But he isn't coming back. Why aren't you coming back? It was like this every day. The more time passed, the more it ate away at his soul. The dinners were silent. And so was the once lively and vibrant house. Sob. 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 All except for the occasional sobbing he'd hear as he roamed the otherwise empty mansion. The warmth. It was gone. It felt cold. And lonely. Come back. I can't do this anymore. How long must I live like this? His emotions were like a chain to him. It's not my fault I'm different. But I'm still him. Just what was so much better about him than me? They glued him down to this suffering. Why can't I get rid of your past? The pain carried on. He aged and so did his family. The same was true for the sense of estrangement. Goodbye. He was merely a man living in someone else's body. He could see it in their eyes and the eyes of everyone else. Be it at work or at home. All he received were looks of pity and estrangement. It was lonely. His life was tack. The only comfort he had was checkers. Tack. Nobody played with him, but tack. That was fine. At least nobody judged him. Because that was the only thing he had left. I looked around me. It was the same park at the academy. Students walked around and a nice breeze wafted through. In the distance, a man played checkers by himself. He was alone but satisfied. How may I help you? He turned his head to address me. His eyes were warm, and so was his smile. Do you have a question about something? I do have some free time. He placed the piece down. It's not like I have much else to do anyway. I shook my head and sat down. Oh? Teach me how to play. The professor looked at me. He suddenly seemed delighted. You want to play? Do you know how to play? I don't. Ha ha ha. Even his laugh was warm. Come, I'll teach you. He started to teach me. The pieces can only move diagonally. Like this. Yeah. He continued to explain. This is how you take pieces and how you. He seemed rather passionate. I listened quietly and followed his instructions. Seemed pretty easy. I think I got it. We can start. Good. Good. Tack, tack, tack. You've lost. I looked at the board and frowned. I didn't even last a few moves. What sort of? Again. Let's do that. Tack, tack, tack. Again, I lost. But. Again. I didn't give up. Tack, tack, tack. This. Are you cheating? Ho ho, I'm just better. That's bullshit. Let's go again. I'll beat you this time. Language. Tack, tack, tack. The matches continued. 5, 10, 20, 50. I'd lose each time. The professor laughed with each victory. On the other hand, I got angrier. You have to be cheating. Bang. I slammed my hand against the table. I had long forgotten about my decorum. Right now. I wasn't acting. I was being me. The real me. How long had that been? Again. It felt liberating. To be me once again. In this world, I didn't have to worry about getting caught, and what the others thought about me. I could just be me. Tack, tack, tack. I moved pieces around. Nice move. It's only natural. But not good enough. Tack. Crafty old bastard. Again. Ho ho. The losses continued, but strangely, they didn't feel bad. Rather, each time I lost, I enjoyed the game more. Especially when I saw myself lasting further and further in the game. I found joy in my progress. Almost like the time when I learned the spell for the first time. Time flew by like this. Ah. So close. I continued to play. I almost got you there. And he continued to beat me. Just you wait. But. There. Ah no. I was getting closer. That's fuck. You damn bastard. Until. Tack. My piece fell on the board and I looked up. There was a silence as we both looked at each other. Professor Bucklam smiled with such rare warmth that made me realize what had happened. I won. After so many tries, I had finally won. I had been so immersed in the game that I hadn't realized. You did. The professor nodded. As he did, his figure gradually started to fade. But even in such a situation, he didn't forget to smile as he lowered his head. Even a fake like me. He seemed happy. Is fun to be with, right? He disappeared shortly after. I sat down on the bench for a long time. Quietly staring at the board. In the end. All he wanted was to be acknowledged. LVL1. Fear EXP plus 7%. Not for his past. But for his present. LVL1. Joy EXP plus 13%. It was there that I understood. There was nothing scarier than loneliness. LVL2. Sadness EXP plus 4%. On this day, Professor Bucklam was arrested. Julian Dacre Ivinus. Leon Rowan Ellert. Kiera Milne. Anders Lewis Richmond. These were the names of the 4 cadets who took down the rogue professor. Clank, clank, clank. Chains rattled as a haggard figure was dragged across a dark corridor. Flanked by 2 robust individuals, both wearing a similar uniform, he was ushered towards a moderately sized room. Inside the room, a man with dark hair and deep brown eyes leaned by the wall. Wearing a long gray coat that reached his knees, he casually looked up. You're here. His dry voice echoed through the room as the 2 men halted, allowing the worn-out figure to collapse onto the floor. Thud. Inquisitor Hallow. The 2 saluted politely. Yeah. CLI click. Lighting up a cigarette, he took a quiet drag while massaging his chin, and looking down. Robert Bucklam. He muttered a single name. A renowned and well-respected professor at the Haven Institute with over 15 years of service. Quite a nice resume we have here, don't we? Robert Bucklam remained quiet on his knees, his head lowered to face the ground. The Inquisitor didn't mind the silence and continued to speak. Why did someone of your reputation stoop to the point they'd attack some children? I'm sure they can be quite annoying. I was once their age, but... His eyes narrowed and he stepped closer. I don't believe for 1 second someone of your stature would stoop to that level unless circumstances made you. Of course, this is just a hunch of mine. He lowered his body to stand at eye level with Robert, who refused to meet his gaze. Not much of a talker. The Inquisitor smiled, and a sizzling sound echoed as he pressed the cigarette against the ground. Tzzzzz. That's fine by me. He pressed his hand against his face, and a white glow enveloped his hand. This might hurt a little. At around 3 p.m. today, Professor Bucklam, a renowned professor of the prestigious Haven Academy, went rogue, attacking one of the students. The reasoning behind his actions has yet to be determined, but an investigation is ongoing. One of the Haven staff in charge of the Institute's public image commented through a speaker. Several reporters stood a few feet before the podium, holding what seemed to be cameras. Click. 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 Their shutters flashed, blinding my sight. I can't believe they have cameras in this type of setting. They look a little old, but I wanted to admire them more, but the situation didn't allow me. Cadet. Cadet. Would you like to leave a statement? Cadet. Please let us know what happened. Why did he attack you? And how did you manage to defeat him? Please leave a statement. Even in this world, reporters were annoying. Not that I knew, given that I had never experienced it myself, but from what I had seen enough, it was probably the case. The cadets will not be answering the questions now. The reporters' attempts at asking us questions were quickly shot down by the staff, who went on to announce, "We're here to award the 4 cadets standing before us for their achievements." Not only were they able to neutralize the threat, but they did so in such a manner that prevented other cadets from getting injured. I sat at the center of the stage alongside Leon, Kira, and Anders. We were all forced to be here to receive our medals for our exemplary performance. It was something that the Academy was very adamant about. What a pain. I thought I had muttered those words quietly, but Kira managed to pick up my voice. Tell me about it. I silently looked at her in surprise. What? Nothing. No, fuck. You can't just say nothing when you look at me like that. Oi. Stop. People are watching. Leon interrupted all of a sudden. Kira was about to speak when she closed her mouth and grunted. Fine. She shot me a glare in the meantime. But I chose to ignore it. She was thinking too much. I thought the situation would end there when. Thank you. I heard Leon's soft voice from beside me. I was surprised for a brief moment, but then closed my eyes and leaned back. Right. I only saved you because I could. I know. At least he knew. I wonder if it was the right decision. The decision to save him stemmed from the fact that he was the key person to help me achieve my goal. But at the same time, he's the same person that kills me in the vision. Indeed, I had potentially saved my killer. Killers. Kira was there too. Heh. I found the situation funny. But at the same time, I didn't think too much of it. The visions could change. They weren't set in stone. Perhaps in the near future, a situation such as that would indeed happen, but I know it will happen. Since I knew it, I could prepare for it. Still, thank you. I quietly nodded before opening my eyes again. My gaze eventually fell on my forearm. More specifically, toward the second tattoo. It had stumped me for the past few days with no reaction whenever I pressed it. I thought that perhaps there was something wrong with it, but recalling the events of last night, I now understood. It makes me relieve someone's most private memories. Another emotion-related ability. Both my abilities were. No, rather than being abilities, they were more like a medium for me to improve in my understatement of emotions. Ha! The thought made me sigh. This was a direct path to insanity. I could feel it. Suddenly, a powerful presence appeared in the distance. She's here. Click. 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 Finally, the flashes were directed away from me for once. When I looked in the distance, a familiar figure appeared. As the Chancellor, it was her duty to assign to us our medals. Her flowing black hair curved slightly, swaying with each step she took. Her extraordinary presence exuded regality that went beyond mere perception. With each step she took, a subtle ripple of magical energy, akin to a gentle breeze, flowed around her. Her innate power had ascended to a level beyond what I could imagine. Looking around the room with her piercing eyes, Delilah walked up to the stage. Without paying a single ounce of attention to the reporters, she gracefully made her way toward the podium. Someone then ran up to her and handed her a short list. She quickly glanced at it before passing it back and nodding her head. "We will now begin the ceremony," the announcer stated. "Our Chancellor will have the honor of providing the cadets with their medals." It was pretty straightforward from there. Under the watchful eyes of the reporters and staff, I stood up and walked up to the podium. We had been instructed beforehand, so we knew exactly what we needed to do. From what order to move, and what to say when receiving the award. I was the first to walk up. Delilah stared at me with her usual blank look. "You did well. The Institute is grateful for what you've done." "Thank you." On closer look, she didn't seem to be really comfortable. I guess she wasn't comfortable with this type of thing. "Come closer, I will put the medal on you." "Oh." I did as I was told and leaned my head closer. In the moment when I leaned forward, I heard a soft whisper in my ear. Feeling her breath on my ear, I shuddered at first. Then, as I processed her words, my brow jumped up, and I had to force myself from making any rash movement. "Seriously?" Clank. The doors of the cell closed and Inquisitor Hallow came out. His rough steps echoed across the dark corridor as he took a drag from the freshly lit cigarette nestled between his lips. Waiting for him at the end of the corridor was an older gentleman. Sporting a bald head and a thick graying mustache, the man stood erect, his slightly protruding belly. In spite of his physical features, he radiated an undeniable aura of authority as the Inquisitor's pace slowed, and he lowered his head. "Warden. Have you found anything?" The warden's voice was rough and dry. Puff. "I've got something." Hallow nibbled on his cigarette before taking it out, and letting the smoke linger on his lips. His emotions. They were manipulated. The warden's brow raised. "An emotive mage." "Yeah, and a powerful one at that." The Inquisitor's expression turned a little grim. What made emotive mages so dangerous? Was it their skill in battle that could disrupt an opponent's flow? Or was it their support during difficult situations? It was neither. The scariest part about emotive mages was that they could manipulate just about anyone into doing something they'd normally not do. By exploiting a weakness and carefully pushing certain buttons. He exploited Bucklam's past and situation and convinced him to do what he did. He most likely was told he'd get healed if he accomplished his job or some nonsense like that. He still hasn't talked, but that's most likely the case since the traces still linger on his body. "You didn't hurt him, did you?" "No. I'm not into that stuff. I was just asking to make sure. Don't want to deal with the annoying aftermath." The warden then proceeded to frown. "What I'm more surprised about is the fact that this happened in Haven. Those guys." Shaking his head, he chuckled. "They were so busy preparing for outside threats that they didn't take into account internal ones. It's the first time I've seen them make such a mistake." "Yeah." Hallow agreed to some degree. To some extent, this incident was out of carelessness from the Institute. Because Professor Bucklam had worked with them for so long, nobody thought he was mentally unstable. It was hence why his actions probably came as a massive surprise to them. While there were means to protect oneself against emotive mages, such means were rare and expensive. It wasn't as if the Academy could afford have all cadets and professors to use them. That brought rise to several questions. Who was the emotive mage behind this, and why did he target the cadets? No, cadet. From the reports, it was clear that he had a specific target. Leon Ellert. He was a talented cadet in the report. But that was it. If the professor's goal was to target talented students, he could have gone for Julian, who was ranked above Leon. If their goal was Haven, then Julian's death would have been more impactful. Surely, there must be something else. What are you going to do now? As his thoughts were broken by the warden's voice, Hallow raised his head. Nibbling onto the cigarette, he thought about his words before answering. I'll be going to Haven. Haven? The warden raised his brows in surprise. Are you going to interrogate the cadets? Something like that. But not exactly. Outside of Leon, there was one individual he was particularly interested in. During the investigation, he had shown Bucklam for pictures. He had only reacted to one. Julian of the Ivinus Barony and the Black Star. It was funny. He too was an emotive mage. A very talented one at that. A connection. It seemed unlikely given the potency of the spell used on Bucklam, but he certainly knew something he didn't. Bucklam wouldn't have reacted like that otherwise. It was an intriguing thought. One that teased his mind the more he dabbled on it. Looks like I have no choice. To satisfy his curiosity, he had to go. Flick. Hallow flicked his cigarette away before lowering his head. Thank you for sparing me the time. I found what I needed. I'll be heading off now. All right, take care. Will do. Placing on his leather gloves, Hallow lowered his head at the warden before leaving. As his steps echoed across the spiraling stairway, his thoughts couldn't help but drift toward the situation. Julian. Leon. Is there truly no connection? I wonder. Returning to his dorm after the inauguration, Leon stood still in the silence. His gaze was locked on the drawer by his bedside. With careful steps, he neared the drawer and opened it. Nestled inside the drawer was a small box. Taking out the box, he carefully placed his hand over the box where a white glow formed. Click. Only then did it open to reveal its contents. Nestled deep within the box was a black chalice. An old and antique one. The contents within the liquid were empty, but there was a strange allure about the chalice that captivated Leon's sight. He could hear faint whispers in his mind as he looked at it. They felt disturbing, and his heart quaked. His eyes closed and memories he had kept hidden resurfaced in his mind. A burning mansion. The desperate screams. The ominous, shadowy figures that pursued him relentlessly. And the cold, yet warm hand that reached out to him. Hoo! Leon drew in a deep breath, sealing the box within his grip. When he opened his eyes, an icy coldness spread across his face as he quietly mumbled. They've found me. Tack. I stared at the book dropped in front of me and looked up. Delilah sat with her back against her chair. Staring at her, I felt my ear twitch. Recalling the moment when she whispered, "Come to my office after this," into my ear back at the inauguration ceremony still gave me chills. Thinking about it, I had the sudden urge to tickle my ear. Damn it. I forced those thoughts away and looked at the book. What is this? Your reward. Reward. I leaned forward to get a better look at the book. I noticed a small chocolate bar beside the book, and I felt the back of my hair stand when my hand hovered over it. Thankfully, it disappeared the moment I picked up the book. Mana Synthesis. What a peculiar name. Your biggest weakness right now is the fact that your mana reserves are low. You're outstanding in everything but in your mana control and reserves. Although it isn't much, this is a blue-ranked manual. It should help you accumulate more mana and speed up your progress. Blue-ranked manual. I was a little surprised by the gift. There were many ways one could increase their strength and jump to the next tier. One such method was through certain manuals that one could practice to increase their mana reserves, which would help one push toward the next tier. Manuals were ranked as follows: green, blue, orange, red, and black. Black being the highest. The Academy provided each cadet with a green-ranked manual at the start. Being a barony, the one my family provided was also green-ranked, so it wasn't much of a difference. Therefore, I was a little taken aback by the sudden gift. Not that I didn't appreciate it, since I didn't hesitate to take it. You're still currently injured, so I suggest you memorize the contents of the book before you start practicing. From what I'm seeing, ever since the start of the Institute, there has been no progress in your tier. I believe this should help you in that matter. Thank you. Indeed, I was still stuck in the same spot I had been from the start. In the 2 weeks I had been in the Academy, besides unlocking a spell, the only progress I had made was in the emotive field. I had tried practicing the green-ranked manual provided by the Institute upon entry, but I struggled to make much progress given that my priorities lay elsewhere. Mainly in the unlockment of my first curse spell. But I knew things couldn't go on like this. I was still lagging behind the other cadets. I needed to make more progress. At the current pace things were going, I wasn't sure I'd be able to survive. I needed to pick up the pace. Make sure you don't lose it. I'm only lending the manual to you for now. Once you memorize it, I would need you to give it back to me. The Institute is rather strict about these kinds of things. Understood. I quietly nodded my head before asking. Is there anything else that you need me for? No. Then you can go. Delilah dismissed me while unwrapping the chocolate bar and eating it. I stood up from my seat and lowered my head slightly. Thank you. But just before I left, my feet came to a pause and I hesitated. Julian. Whatever. Turning around, I pointed at my mouth. Your mouth. Clank. Staring at Julian's departing back, Delilah felt her lips twitch as she wiped them with a tissue. She tossed the tissue to the side right after she was done. Then, she closed her eyes. Have I done the right thing? She was unsure. However, this was necessary. With time, it became clearer and clearer to her. Julian. Outside of the emotive field, he wasn't very talented. A gap would form between him and the current cadets at the current rate that he was progressing. He may have been able to stand out because of his strong mind and emotive abilities, but how long could that last? A month? 2 months? He didn't have much time, and as someone who had personally vouched for his position, Delilah felt compelled to interfere a little. A blue-ranked manual wasn't much to the Academy. However, it was an important asset. The manuals couldn't be read as many times as one pleased. A certain mana flow was imbued into the book which would decrease with each read. It wasn't an infinite resource. Unless someone wrote the manual again, it'd be gone forever. And the higher the rank of the book, the harder it was to create. It was for this reason that books that were ranked higher than green were so sparse. Simply put, the demand for them was too high, and the supply was too low. Drumming her fingers over her desk, Delilah closed her eyes. Even now, her mind wandered back to the tattoo on his arm. The more she looked at him, the more confused she became. Is he an enemy or an ally? There were signs that pointed him to be an enemy and signs that said otherwise. Which one was the right sign? Chewing on her thoughts, Delilah's eyes slowly opened. I'll only help you out this much. When I returned to my dorm, the first thing I did was sit down and open the book. I'm supposed to do this, right? I placed my hand over the book and channeled my mana over it. Swoosh. A pathway appeared in my mind. 17 channels, all leading toward the abdomen where my mana core was. The area where my mana gathered. That's 5 more channels than before. I immediately put the manual into practice. As expected, this was a lot better. EXP plus 0.01%. The notifications appearing in front of me served to prove that. EXP plus 0.01%. For every 5 minutes that I followed the channels, a new notification would appear. EXP plus 0.01%. It went on like this for precisely 1 hour until I could no longer continue and stopped. EXP plus 0.01%. Drip. Drip. My clothes were soaked and my breathing was rough. Even so, I could feel myself progressing. It was unlike anything I had experienced before. I had managed to progress more in an hour than in the 2 weeks that I had been in this world. A pity. I wanted to continue practicing, but recalling Delilah's words, I knew that I had to stop. Further than this and I was risking my life. I lay on my back and stared at the ceiling of the room. I felt a little tired. It had been a little more than 2 weeks since I had been in this world, and so much had happened. It felt as though several months had passed when in reality, it was a lot less than that. My mind was exhausted and I wanted a little break from everything. However, I knew that it was impossible. Even now, I was blindly chasing a goal I had no clue about. The more time passed, the more confused I was. What exactly was I supposed to do? Did I just have to get stronger and slowly unravel the clues that were laid out? My path. It felt like a dark road with no end in sight. I was just going on a blind, hoping that things would turn out for the best. But that wasn't good enough. I needed more. But how? How exact? The rogue professor, you have overcome the first event. A message flickered in my vision, and I abruptly sat up. What? Another message flickered the next moment. Leon has realized he has been found, and that he doesn't have a lot of time left. Game progression EXP plus 1%. Game progression 0%-1%, 100%. Character progression EXP plus 12%. EXP 0%, 28%, 100%. What is this? A warm current suddenly invaded my body. Just briefly, I felt the mana inside of my body flow smoother and become thicker. The feeling was the same as the one from a few moments ago, but it was a lot thicker and more evident. I sat there dumbstruck by the sudden development. But if that wasn't enough. Main quest activated, prevent the calamities from awakening or dying. Calamity 1, slumber. Progress 0%. Calamity 2, slumber. Progress 2%. Calamity 3, slumber. Progress 0%. Another window flickered in my vision, and I felt my eyes widen. This. I sat frozen, staring at the window in front of me with wide open eyes. I had a hard time trying to make sense of what was before me. What is this? The sudden situation. It made no sense. How could it suddenly? You have overcome the first event. My mouth unconsciously opened as I read the first notification. Leon has realized he has been found, and that he doesn't have a lot of time left. I chewed on those words as I continued to stare at the notifications in front of me. I stood there for a couple of seconds before closing my eyes and taking a small breath. So the criteria to activate it was for the first event to be cleared. Or at least seemed to be. There were still that didn't make sense to me, but I had no time to think about those matters. There was something else that was more pressing. Main quest activated, prevent the calamities from awakening or dying. Calamity 1, slumber. Progress 0%. Calamity 2, slumber. Progress 2%. Calamity 3, slumber. Progress 0%. This is. The more I stared at it, the more confused I became. But in the end, I understood something. I need to stop them from awakening or dying. Kira, Aoife, and Evelyn. These were the 3 calamities. It was something that stuck with me ever since the memory of before my death. Why were they called calamities I wasn't sure, but for whatever reason, I needed to stop them from awakening or dying. That was my main goal. I didn't quite understand the reasoning behind the task, or whether it was something I could trust, but to get answers, I needed to follow the quest. Just what would happen when the game completion reached 100%? Would I get to finally go back home? What happens if I fail? There wasn't anything that indicated what would happen if I were to fail, but I could more or less guess. Game over. Right. The situation became even more confusing, but I need to try it. I had to try it. For the first time since entering this world, I finally had something to cling to. A hope. The dark path that I was following finally didn't seem as dark. I had finally found a path. Whether it would lead to nowhere, I had no idea. But I had to follow it. This was my commitment. A few days passed since then. It was Friday, the end of the week. Things had cooled down after the incident with the professor. The institute had kept a hushed stance on the situation, stopping all cadets from talking about it. That wasn't the only thing that changed. Everyone, ranging from cadets to professors, was assigned to a psychiatrist. Given the tragic circumstances, the institute has mandated that all personnel and cadets undergo mental health assessments to ensure a situation like this does not happen again. Such was the announcement of the professor in charge of today's lesson. His words instantly aroused a wave of groans, with one in particular being louder than the others. This is bullshit. That rough and unfiltered voice. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Kira Milne. The professor sternly spoke. He appeared to be quite tall, with short brown hair framing his face, complemented by thin-framed glasses obscuring his green eyes. He was quite young, and his looks were on the good side. He didn't follow up from there, but the meaning behind his gaze was quite clear. Don't swear. Tisk. The class continued from there. Everyone please get on your stations. It was a peculiar class. This over here is how you cook the mandrigal. First, you cut its stomach open and remove its lungs. When you remove the organs, make sure you remove the gallbladder. The name of the class was Culinary Guidance, and it focused on teaching the cadets about the monsters in the mirror dimension and how to prepare them. You must remove it as it is highly poisonous to us. Perhaps it was because I had been taking care of myself and my brother for as long as I could remember. I was able to follow the class smoothly. Tack, tack. The knife effortlessly sliced the stomach of the creature set in front of me. It was hard to describe. It appeared notably furry, with two of its eyes extending upwards from their sockets. Below, two long legs were aligned, and it appeared to have no eyes. In short, it didn't look appetizing. Make sure you don't throw away the eyes. They're packed with nutrients and can be dried for rations later on in your journey in the mirror dimension. But I still followed the professor's instructions to a T. Guiding my knife around the eyes, I smoothly removed them from the creature and placed them in a nearby bucket. When you cut, you must make sure to cut it into equal pieces. Tack, tack. It was weird, but I felt strangely at home. This wasn't any harder than the things I had been cooking back at home when it was just me and my little brother. Slicing the pieces into equal portions, I looked around me to see that I was the only one that was capable of following along with the instructions. Professor, can you slow down? I cut it too short. What do I do? Damn it. Even Aoife appeared to be struggling as her eyes were knit together tightly. Okay, here's the next step. Once you're done cutting the mandrigal into pieces, place it in the pot in front of you and let it boil in the soup. It's a very tough meat, so we must cook it on a low burn. The professor then proceeded to place the fillets into a large pot in front of him. I also had one, and it had been put on simmer since the start of the lesson. I had already put the necessary ingredients beforehand, so all that was left was plop. Chucking the fillets into the pot. And done. I patted my hands in satisfaction. I felt a strange sense of accomplishment out of this. All right. It will take approximately until the end of the lesson for the meat to become tender. For those who are finished, please clean up your stations and wash up your dirty dishes. The professor's gaze wandered around before eventually falling on me. Ah! That was when I understood. I was the only one that had managed to keep up. Simmer. Aoife stared at her pot and swallowed her saliva. The water bubbled and the pieces of the mandrigal floated at the top. It wasn't the first time she had eaten the mandrigal. While not a rare delicacy, it was still an infant-ranked beast. With several noticeable health benefits such as the cleansing of impurities, it was a staple food amongst the population of the empire. But plop. I can eat this. Aoife secretly swallowed. She had followed the instructions to perfection, so logically yes, but she closed the lid. Maybe not. It didn't look that appetizing. Aoife looked around her. All the cadets were still busy cutting the mandrigal. Only a few were done with that part, and were now placing the cuts inside of the pot. All with the exception of one. It's you again. He was done a lot faster than them. 9 minutes faster to be exact. The gap between him and the rest was evident, and Aoife felt herself frowning at the thought. Why is he so good at everything? In the time that she had spent at the academy, he had beaten her in almost everything besides the magic and physical score. There was a gap between them in that matter, but he's an emotive mage. It made sense for him to lag in such matters when he was so proficient in such a field. It was a frustrating thought, but he was competent. The thought made her competitive spirit flare up. He may have been faster, but that doesn't mean it's better. Yeah. Speed wasn't important. What was important was taste. The image of the contents in her pot flashed in her mind, and her blank expression cracked. Aoife looked around. Julian was still away washing the dishes, and so was the professor, who went out to get a new supply of mandrigal for the students who failed to cut it on the first try. A thought struck her. Just maybe. Just a little taste. Right. She just wanted to check if had seasoned properly. Making sure that there was no one paying attention to her, she carried a few trays with her and moved toward Julian's desk. It was on the way to the cleaning station outside, and just a few steps away from her station. She could play this out well. Her steps stopped at the station. It was clean, with the only thing left being the pot and the stove. Pursing her lips, she looked around before carefully opening the lid of the pot. Plop. A nice aroma wafted through the moment she opened the lid, and her brow twitched. It can. What are you doing? A cold voice echoed from behind her, and Aoife almost flinched. Thankfully, she was able to keep herself composed and turned around. Platinum long hair, deep red eyes, and a gaze that was filled with nothing but contempt. With a look that suggested she had caught a rat, Kira smirked. Are you trying to sabotage the competition? She didn't even try to hide the disdain in her voice. You haven't changed, have you? You're still the same. Whenever someone better than you appears, you try to put them down. Aren't I right? Aoife frowned. What is she on about? She couldn't understand what she was talking about. And perhaps noticing her confusion, Kira suddenly smirked while shaking her head. Fucking bitch. You never change. Aoife's face turned cold. What did you call me? Bitch. Kira emphasized while leaning her head closer. What? Is the sheltered princess angry? A small crack appeared on Aoife's blank expression. You think I wouldn't call you out on your shit? That I would just let you do whatever the fuck you wanted just because you're the fucking princess? The cracks on her face became larger. Her well-maintained facade was slowly crumbling. Still nothing. Kira's eyes squinted as her smirk became more prominent. Pathetic. Aoife clenched her teeth, and her expression almost crumbled. However, with the little rationality she had left, she turned to look away from her and focused her attention back on the pot. All of a sudden, she didn't feel like tasting it anymore. She was just about to close the lid when a finger poked into the soup. Oh. It's not bad. Licking her lips, Kira looked at Aoife before taking the salt and sprinkling it over the soup. Her eyes widened and she looked back. It's missing a little salt. Stop it. Her hand reached for the salt, but Kira deftly avoided her and continued to sprinkle it. Or what? It's not my soup. So. I'm just helping a classmate out. Stop it. Aoife's voice grew cold, but that only served to encourage Kira, who doubled down on the salt. First the middle finger on the first day, then this. Aoife found her patience running thin. Her mana flowed and Kira's hand stiffened. You. Unbothered by the look she was receiving, Aoife reached out for the salt when KKH. Her telekinesis shattered and Kira's hand swung in the air. Fucking bitch. Who told you that you coo? Plop. Her words were broken by an abrupt plopping sound and the two of them stiffened on the spot. Especially Aoife, who found her mouth opening at the sight. Oh. A single word came out of her lips. When she looked up again, she found Kira standing rigidly by her side. A cold voice followed a few seconds after. What are you doing here? For a brief moment, Aoife panicked. Your food. It was overflowing. Overflowing. Julian's gaze latched onto her, and Aoife felt her mouth go dry. Eventually, though, he turned his gaze away and focused it on the pot. His nose wrinkled at the sight of the soup. Aoife's face tightened. Where is the salt? His gaze wandered back to her, and she almost flinched. Thankfully, she was quick-witted. Kira borrowed it. She pointed at Kira and threw her under the bus. Feeling her finger, Kira opened her eyes to rebuke but ultimately stopped and nodded. You were done, so. Oh. The two simultaneously sighed in relief at that moment, and Kira glared at Aoife, who silently felt the corner of her lips pull. Throwing her under the bus like that. It felt strangely nice. Give it back to me when you're done. Will do. With a quiet nod, Julian shifted his attention back to the pot. What he didn't notice was the sudden change in Aoife and Kira's expressions. It should be ready. Especially when he picked up the spoon by his right. Unable to notice anything out of the ordinary, Julian lifted the spoon to reveal a thick viscous brown liquid. Looks good. Aoife felt every part of her body grow tense. The same was true for Kira, whose entire face was twitching. And then, under the horrified eyes of the two of them, Julian brought the spoon to his mouth. His expression immediately shifted the moment the spoon touched his mouth, and his head flicked their way. A strange tension lingered over the area they were in as his voice, colder than it usually was, asked. Did you do something to the soup? No. No. The two of them shook their heads at the same time, though their refusal sounded anything but convincing. Even so. Is that so? Strangely, Julian didn't seem all that bothered. Putting the spoon down, he frowned. It was as if he was undecided about something. Then, just when the two of them were fearing for the worst, they heard his soft mumble. Since when was I such a good cook? It was a dilemma. Staring at the soup in front of me, I looked back at Aoife and Kira, who seemed strangely stiff. Did they really do nothing to the soup? I brought the spoon to my mouth and closed my eyes. My tonsils danced at the rich taste that invaded my tongue, and I found myself quietly nodding. It tasted phenomenal. To the point where I couldn't help but mumble to myself. Since when was I such a good cook? While I didn't think I was bad, I had never made something so good. Could it be because of the ingredients? Was that what it was? Why, you think it's really good? Kira stuttered from the side and I frowned. What's wrong with her? Perhaps noticing my expression, she forced a smile and turned back. Anyway. Thanks for the salt. She proceeded to head back to her station. That was when I felt another gaze. I turned to look at Aoife, who was staring back at me. Her expression was hard to read, but for a brief moment, I thought I saw disbelief in her gaze. What sort of? Picking up her trays, she left without saying another word. I stared at her back for a brief moment before shrugging my shoulders. I really couldn't understand her. Staring at her back for a brief moment, I turned my attention back to my pot and had another taste. I smacked my lips together and frowned. It's good. But it's missing something. What exactly? I thought for a moment before coming to a conclusion. It needs more salt. The taste was a little too mild. Possibly sweet. It needed a little bit more salt. I reached to my left where the salt was, but I grasped nothing but air. I was confused at first, but then I remembered. Ah, right. Kira had taken the salt. I turned to look at her, and our eyes met. She raised her brow. What? The salt. I pointed at the one she had on her desk. Can I have I? Clank, clank, clank. I was interrupted by a loud noise. When I turned to look, I saw Aoife standing with all the trays on the floor. Her otherwise blank expression showed signs of breaking as her eyes widened. What? She wasn't the only one who was behaving oddly. Just as I turned my head, I heard Kira's low mutter. Lunatic. She was also looking at me with wide eyes. Fucking lunatic. When I woke up, it was Saturday morning. In a daze, I remained on the bed and stared at the ceiling. I finally had a day to myself. It was hard to describe how I currently felt. The days had been so hectic that every single day felt like they lasted a year. But today was different. There was nothing on my schedule today. Finally, I could take a much-needed break. Let's take a shower. Shaw. I needed something to wake my groggy mind. The cold water was especially useful, as I felt refreshed coming out of the shower. There was nothing better than a cold shower in the morning to refresh my mind. I looked at my wet body in the mirror. It was chiseled to perfection, and there seemed to be no scars or imperfections. My shoulders and biceps were quite large, while my abdominal muscles were finely sculpted, and my thighs felt as solid as rock. I had always wanted this type of body in my previous life. I would always tell myself to go to the gym on a daily basis, but I would stop with some sort of nonsensical excuse. The longest I had ever lasted at the gym was 2 months. Seeing no progress in the mirror, I lost all motivation and just gave up. But things were different now. I touched my body. With how hard I was training at the moment, I could easily maintain this body. Not only that, but it could probably get even better in the future. A pity it isn't my real body. It was still hard for me to fully associate myself with this body. However, I was slowly getting there. Even so. When I return, I'll get my old body back. I was merely rumbling at this point. The reality was that I wasn't sure if I could go back or not. No sign pointed out to that fact. However, I had to cling to this idea. It was the only thing that kept me going. If I were to learn that I couldn't go back, then. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Opening them again, I leaned forward to stare at my reflection. I will be going back. After drying my body, I went on to sit on the couch. Basking the sun's glow, I mumbled. Status. Julian D. Ivinus. Level, 17, Tier 1 Magician. EXP, 0%, 34%, 100%. Profession, Magician. Type, Elemental Curse. Type, Mind Emotive. Spells. Beginner type spell, Emotive Anger. Intermediate type spell, Emotive Sadness. Beginner type spell, Emotive Fear. Beginner type spell, Emotive Happiness. Beginner type spell, Emotive Disgust. Beginner type spell, emotive, surprise. Beginner type spell, curse, chains of Alacantria. Beginner type spell, curse, hands of malady. Skills. Innate foresight. Julian D. Ivinus. There was some progress, but it was still too slow. In the days that had passed since the quest, I had only grown by about 6%. And this was taking into account that I was now using a blue-ranked mana synthesis. I need to find a way to get a better manual. From what I had learned, there were multiple ways one could get stronger. The first one was through the scriptures and manuals. The second one was through resources gathered from the mirror dimension, and the last was through the implantation of bones. I was still unsure of how the last one worked, but from what I read, certain monsters in the mirror dimension had special bones that one could implant in their bodies to gain skills. Innate skills. They had different grades, which mostly depended on the rank of the monster, and there were apparently a few in our class who already had a bone implanted in them. I'll get there when the chance comes. It was still a little too early for me. I was just planning to start training again when... Weeing. My communication device, a small white orb, flickered. Confused, I turned it on and loaded the message. Julian Ivinus, Leon Ellert, Aoife Migrail. May the following cadets show up at the entrance of the Institute in an hour. It was a message from the Institute board. Congratulations. You have all been selected for the upcoming draft selection inauguration. An instructor will guide the following students to the ceremony that will take place in Lens. Kindly make yourself available. I continued to stare at the message with a blank look before turning off the device and sitting down. I opened my mouth but no words came out. Eventually, I lowered my head and stayed silent. In the silence that took over the room, I closed my eyes and pursed my lips. LVL2. Sadness, EXP plus 0.01%. Asterisk. When I came out of my room, I found Leon already waiting for me. Oh. I didn't even bother greeting him, and just continued forward. I was in no mood for anything. But that seemed to be the case for him as well. In the silence, we walked towards the entrance of the academy. When we reached the place, 10 people were already waiting for us at the entrance. With 11 names on the list, we were essentially the last to arrive. You two are finally here. At the forefront stood someone I found somewhat familiar. With a thick, long red beard and a muscular physique, he was Professor Chambers, one of the examiners from my examination day and a high wizard. Hurry up, you two. The train to Lens will depart in 10 minutes. You will be held responsible if we miss the train. His rough voice echoed throughout as I picked up the pace slightly. Honestly, I wouldn't mind missing it. The professor continued. As many of you know, there will be a draft at the end of the year. The 6 best cadets from each year will be chosen to represent the Institute at such an event. You all must take this seriously. Squinting his eyes, I felt his gaze pause on me. The 10 of you are the most promising cadets that we currently have in our first years. Some of the most promising we've had in decades, and it is therefore extremely important that you carry yourself in a manner fitting of your status. I then finally realized why he was looking at me. Taking a step closer, we were only a few steps away from each other. Placing his hand on my shoulder, he looked at me seriously. As the Black Star, you will be the center of all attention and the group's leader. I need you to carry yourself as such. Is that understood? I stood in silence without saying a single word. Cadet? Only when he called me again did I raise my head. Closing my eyes, I silently cursed. Fuck. Main quest activated, unmask the fraud. Character progression plus 5%. Game progression plus 1%. Failure. Calamity 3 plus 5%. It was just as the professor was talking to me that it happened. Ah. The world froze and my vision turned dark. All of a sudden I lost control of my body. It was a sensation I was all too familiar with. Another vision. The scenery shifted, enveloping me in the opulent embrace of a grand hall. Its lavish decor was blinding with all sorts of individuals present. Such grand hall was silent. It was as if the sound had been sucked out of the room. All eyes seemed to be focused on a certain spot. Or more specifically, towards two people. We've found it. A towering figure with slender facial contours, jet black hair, a long nose, and bushy eyebrows peered down at his palm, where a small orb, reminiscent in size of a glass pebble, rested. What's that? There was something about the pebble that seemed intriguing. It had a strange allure to it. Almost as if it was beckoning me to take it. But I had no time to dwell on it as the next set of events continued. Why did you steal it? The man's voice thundered down towards the other individual, a woman adorned with cascading violet locks and piercing blue eyes. She returned his gaze with a frozen look. Her eyes trembled, and so did her body. He raised his hand to display a black purse. This is yours, isn't it? Evelyn's expression remained locked in a state of disbelief, her mouth opening and closing repeatedly in a futile attempt to articulate her words. No, There's no denying your crime. He coldly cut her off. We've searched everyone and you were the only one that was found with this. Do you think you can talk your way out of this? He didn't seem interested in her ramblings. Coldly turning his gaze away from her, he looked toward the guards stationed nearby. Take her in for questioning. No, wait. The guards latched onto her arms from both sides. This is a mistake. She tried to protest, but it was to no avail. That's not mine. I don't know where it came from. This is a. Under the scrutiny of all present, Evelyn was forcibly escorted by the guards out of the hall. Her eyes searched the entire hall, eventually falling on me. Me? Help me, is what her gaze tried to imply. I stood rooted to my spot, transfixed by her desperate expression, unable to tear my gaze away. It sealed itself into my mind until the very end. When her figure finally disappeared. The vision ended there. I stood in silence without saying a single word. Cadet? Only when I heard the sound of the professor's voice did I finally raise my head. A screen appeared shortly after. Side quest activated, unmask the fraud. Character progression plus 5%. Game progression plus 1%. Failure. Calamity 3 plus 5%. Did you understand what I said? The professor's voice started to sound irritated, and I quietly nodded my head. I couldn't focus on him at the moment. The only thing that was in my mind was the vision. So the quest is about exposing who the real thief is. Or was it to prevent Evelyn from finding herself in such a situation? Either way, I now knew who Calamity 3 was. It was Evelyn. That only left me with Calamity 1 and Calamity 2. Who they were, I was still unsure yet. However, given time, I knew I'd be able to piece it all together. Follow me in a single line. The train will be here shortly. I once again looked up and saw that the other cadets were moving along. I picked up my pace and followed them from behind. My gaze unconsciously trained toward a swaying set of purple hair not too far from me. I thought back to the expression she made back in the vision. The one that was filled with shock and desperation. A thought ran down my mind at that moment. Why did she look at me of all people for help in the vision? The draft. An empire-wide event was broadcast and displayed all over. The draft took place every end of the year, selecting the top 60 cadets from all the major academies within the empire. There existed 15 guilds within the empire. All associated with the royal family, they were the only organizations besides the academies that granted entrance to the mirror dimension. If one became affiliated with the guild, they could enter the mirror dimension whenever they wanted. The competition among the guilds was harsh, and each year, the cadets were intensively scrutinized to determine who would be the first pick of the draft. The benefits of becoming the first-ranked pick were rather obvious for all. With sign-in bonuses that eclipsed those of the other picks, every cadet looked forward to becoming the number 1 pick. We have just passed Ensun. We will be arriving at the station soon. Professor Chambers informed all of us. The city of Lens was incredibly rich, with many different districts in place. Our current destination was Rudman, the main commercial street of Lens. It was the richest district and where the House of Picks was located. An esteemed auction house where the inauguration was going to take place. Coming out of the train station, we strolled through the district, where magnificent streets lined with vendors on both sides greeted our eyes. The House of Picks was located by the river that cut through the city. It therefore took us about 10 minutes to get there from the train station. A crowd had already formed at the entrance of the building. It was hard to see through the packed crowd, with reporters mingling among regular people. Thankfully, there was a separate area we could enter from. Welcome to the House of Picks. It was a middle-aged man with refined clothing that greeted us. You must be the distinguished guests from Haven. We have already reserved a place for you. He then proceeded to guide us toward a sizable room. I originally expected him to guide us toward the hall in the vision, but contrary to my expectations, we were guided toward a different place. A private room of some sort. Wow! Coming into the room, I had to pause for a moment to admire the setting. At the forefront of the room, a grand window greeted my sight, below which stretched a substantial stage adorned with hundreds of seats now filling with attendees. All of whom were wearing formal clothing, unlike the rest of us. The scene below appeared chaotic, unlike where we were. The announcement will be made shortly. The butler proceeded to say from the entrance of the room. Please feel free to enjoy yourselves in this room for now. Once the announcement is over, we will invite you all to the main ceremony where you can interact with the other guests. With a bow, he went on to talk with the professor, who had a few things to ask. Only then did the other cadets finally start speaking again. Wow, this room looks awesome. Can we take this food? Despite most of the participants being sons of high nobles, they still seemed somewhat excited about the situation. Well, all besides a select few. Aoife, Kira, and Leon were the exception, as they immediately found a seat and sat down. I thought about finding a seat as well when... Here. Someone handed me a black book. This is... It's the shop list. Shop list. I blinked my eyes and looked to my right, where a person stood. I had grown a little familiar with him. I didn't remember at first, but I couldn't forget about him after meeting him during the forest incident. Had it not been for him, I would have been unable to prevent the incident. Anders Lewis Richmond. Ever since that incident, his attitude toward me underwent a complete change. He no longer seemed confrontational. In fact, he appeared to be making an effort to foster a friendlier relationship with me. I was put off at first, but seeing how his intentions weren't malicious, I let him be. As you probably know, the House of Picks is actually a famous auction house. Although there is no auction today, the shop is still open. If you're interested in something, you can try buying it. Ah. I nodded slightly and opened the book. I wonder if there's anything I can buy. I was somewhat intrigued. Mana Association Green, 50,000 Rand. Essence Awake Nanaying Green, 70,000 Rand. Melton Mana Manual Green, 120,000 Rand. Holy fuck. My heart almost jumped at the sight of the prices. The currency within this world was called the Rand. If I had to make a conversion rate compared to my old world, then it'd probably be 1 Rand for $1. The purchasing power seemed to be about the same. And just looking at the prices of the green-ranked book, I knew that I had no business here. I may have been the son of a noble, but the amount of money that I had didn't even come close to letting me purchase a green-ranked book. What sort of corruption was this? I immediately skimmed past the first few pages, but 100,000 Rand. 1 million Rand. 17 million Rand. The deeper I went, the more absurd the prices became. It was to the point where I was just scrolling through the book for the sake of wasting time. As if I could afford any of this stuff. That was until I found myself pausing toward a certain section. Metrobone 4, 320,000 rand. A certain image captured my attention, and my eyes widened. This is... It was only a picture, but the overlapped with the image in my mind. The one from the vision. Ah! The more I looked at it, the more certain I felt. It's the item that was found in the vision. The one that caused all of the commotion. I blinked and took a seat. Phew. So it was a bone. I swallowed my saliva and stared at the image once more. So the item that she was framed with was this bone. It looked nothing like a bone, but perhaps there was something that I was missing. Either way, I understood now. The reason why the situation seemed so serious. So then... Why? Why did my chest tingle at the sight of the item on the list? It wasn't just that, my fingers. They were twitching. Thoughts I wasn't supposed to have suddenly engulfed my mind. As I sat down on my seat, my foot started to tap against the ground. As I continued to stare at the listing, I silently swallowed. A thought crossed my mind. One that I wasn't supposed to have. This orb. Can I take it for myself? A tall man stood on the stage. His appearance grabbed the attention of all those present. Ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming to the inauguration of the 57th 7th draft. As he spoke, his voice boomed throughout the grand hall. It silenced all the noise within the venue. It's with great pride that I stand before you as the announcer of today's event. He went on with the introductions. Useless ramblings that went on for several minutes before the lights turned off. What followed after was silence as the noise ceased. We will now be introducing the 15 guilds. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. 15 banners fell from the sides, all displaying different intricate patterns and colors. Lights flickered, pointing toward each banner, displaying their extravagance for all to see. They appeared finely crafted, adorned with intricate golden patterns and fashioned from rare fabrics. The patterns and insignias appeared to be meticulously handcrafted, with each banner's design particularly unique, standing out in one way or another. On any normal occasion, I would have been intrigued by the events. But I can take it, can I? All I could think about was the quest. Or more specifically, the bone. Just how much stronger would I become if I were to take the bone? A human was only allowed to implant 5 bodies into their body. Any more would be too dangerous. However, from what I had read, after the integration of the bone, one would find their strength increasing and be granted an innate ability that used to belong to the soul of the deceased beast. It was an extremely enticing opportunity, and I knew that I couldn't let it slip away from my grasp. Especially given my current strength. I was in desperate need of something like that. But what about the quest? Would it allow it? The quest didn't specify what I needed to do. In my mind, what the quest demanded from was to expose the fraud and prevent Evelyn from reaching the scenario from the vision. But there was nothing in the quest that suggested I couldn't take the bone. And it wasn't as if the quest could control me. Whether I chose to complete the mission or not, I had full freedom of choice. Since that was the case, why couldn't I take the bone? I know who will have it. When she will have it. And how they find it. For what reason can I not find a way to take the bone for myself? The more I thought about it, the more I felt my chest prickle. Ah! This sensation. It threatened to consume my mind at any second. It was foreign at first, but it became clearer with the passing of time. Greed. Right, I was being greedy. I was coveting something that shouldn't have been mine in the first place. Heh. For some reason, the thought made me want to laugh. I thought about all the implications that my actions would have on the innocent workers and staff of the auction house. It pricked at my consciousness, but at the same time, I knew that I couldn't afford to be sentimental. Morality. I needed to throw it away. I was no longer Emmett Rowe. Morality was no longer a thing for me. While I had a few lines that I couldn't bring myself to cross, the rest, I had to throw them away. I had sworn I'd do anything to become stronger and achieve my goal. And taking the bone, knowing that it was something I could do and would be instrumental for my goal, I knew I had to do it. Right. Because in the end, I couldn't afford to miss such a chance. For my sake, I had to be greedy. Ever since the start of the inauguration, Evelyn felt weird. It felt as though someone was watching her every movement. And yet, when she looked, all she saw was the empty space behind her. Is it just me? She looked to her left and then right. Once she was sure there was nothing wrong, she returned her gaze back to the front. Her eyebrows slowly came to a furrow. She could have sworn she had felt something. And she usually was never wrong about these things. Her senses were generally quite accurate. Strange. What is? A dry voice reached her ears. Her eyes widened at the sound of the voice, and her head flicked to her right, where a familiar figure was sitting. Julian? What is he? Ha! Her shock hardly lasted more than a couple of seconds, before her face returned back to its normal icy one. It was a face she only displayed to those she deemed unfamiliar. Indeed, the current Julian was someone she was unfamiliar with. I was getting a weird feeling before. I thought someone was watching me, but I didn't think it'd be you of all people. Things were starting to make sense to her now. The strange sensation. It was him, wasn't he? He was the one that was looking at her. Or at least, that was Evelyn thought to be the case. But then again, why would he even look at her now, when he had hardly paid her any attention back at the institute? She had liked the way things were, so why the sudden change? Was she missing something? Her thoughts were further reinforced by his silence, and she felt puzzled. Is there something that you want to say? Julian raised his brow, and the two of them looked at each other. Evelyn frowned. You didn't come all the way here for nothing, right? He didn't bother answering her, as he seemed lost in his thoughts. Evelyn found herself growing annoyed by his antics. An image overlapped with his. It was a younger version of him. Unlike the current stoic expression he wore a look filled with nothing but disdain. Certainly, he's different from the past, but... Her mind was brought back to the memories of 5 years ago. It was a memory she could never forget. Regardless of how hard she tried, she couldn't forget. Even now, she could distinctively remember everything. From the weather to the smells. Everything felt vivid to her. And it was exactly because it felt so vivid that she couldn't find herself to see him differently. He's the same. He may act differently, but inside, he's the same. That's right. She mustn't be fooled by how he was currently behaving. 5 years may have passed, but he had done that day. I won't be fooled. At that moment, Evelyn caught sight of Julian. Leaning against the chair, his lips gently pulled into what seemed to be a smile. Her expression hardened. What? It's nothing. With a shake of his head, he gradually stood up. I've already got what I wanted. Evelyn felt lost staring at him. What sort of game was he playing? She was just about to speak when his voice suddenly cut in. Enjoy your evening. Ah. He left shortly after that, leaving Evelyn unable to utter a single thing back. In the end, she hadn't figured out if he was truly the one that was looking at her. She's being targeted. That was the conclusion that I came up with after talking to her briefly. I first drew up that conclusion from how she was behaving. Noticing how she'd turn her head to look around from time to time, I knew that something was up. Would someone act like that unless they felt that something was off? I would have normally not bothered, but superhumans tended to be a lot more accurate at judging these kinds of things. It was highly likely that she was truly being watched. It was also for this reason that I initiated a conversation with her. I needed to verify this conclusion. It was an important piece of information after all. The end result. I thought someone was watching me, but I didn't think it'd be you of all people. She indeed felt like someone was watching her. While it was indeed true that I was also watching her, that had only been from the point where she had started to act suspiciously. Before that, I had been in my own thoughts, thinking about the vision and the quest. Only when I had digested everything did I turn my attention to her and notice her strange attitude. In any case, I was now certain of a few things. The culprit might be someone from this room, and he's targeting her directly. I had been worried that in the vision she had merely been the culprit out of bad luck. That perhaps whoever the thief was, made her the culprit simply because she was the easiest target to place the blame on. If such a scenario were to be true, then I wasn't confident I could steal the item. Mainly because I couldn't guarantee the fact that I could act exactly as the version of me had in the vision. There was a real chance that someone else would have been used as a target instead of Evelyn. All because of my actions in trying to interfere with the situation. Some sort of butterfly effect. But now that I was more or less sure that she was the intended target, I didn't need to worry about the vision changing too drastically. The bone was going to be with her. And that was all the information that I needed to formulate a plan. What I needed to do next was wait. Wait for everything to begin. When that happens, I'll take it all. Game progression, character progression, and bone. I'll take everything. Such was how big my greed was. And with that, I will now be ending my speech. For any of you who are present, there will be an after-party that you may be able to attend. The announcer's voice boomed, signaling the end of the ceremony. Just before he ended things, he made a small announcement. To the cadets who are present, take this chance to get acquainted with your competitors as well as get a better understanding of the 15 major guilds. It will be a great opportunity for you in the long term. It was on that note that he finally left the stage, and the hall erupted into a wave of applause. Clap, clap, clap. Evelyn joined in the clapping, and just as Evelyn clapped once, the chair beside her skidded back. What? What's going on? With visibly groggy eyes and messy hair, Kira looked around in confusion. Then, seeing what everyone was doing, she joined in on the applause. Fucking amazing speech. Clap, clap, clap. Evelyn watched the scene at a loss for words. She had been sleeping, hadn't she? Kira Milne. Evelyn's thoughts about her were rather conflicted. On the one hand, she was extremely talented, rivaling her in almost every category. The only thing that set her off was her personality. Her words were crude, and she was too confronting. She treated everyone as though they were her enemy, and it was because of that Evelyn found herself struggling to get along with her. A bit disappointing considering her talent. Ha! With a long sigh, she leaned back on the chair. The watchful feeling had disappeared about halfway through the speech, and only then did she sigh in relief. So it really could have been him. Julian. It had only been a few minutes after he left that she stopped feeling that way. Was it a coincidence? Or was he truly the one who was keeping an eye out for her? Ma'am. The afterpart will be held in the main hall. If you would please. Disrupting her thoughts was the butler who carefully passed on the same massage to all of those present. He proceeded to hand her purse back. If you keep going ahead, you will be able to find the entrance of the hall. There will be colleagues waiting for you there. Thank you. Without thinking too much, she took the purse and proceeded to head out of the room and toward the main hall. It was as the butler said. All she had to do was keep going straight. With many of the guests heading the same way, it wasn't hard for her to reach the hall, which was already packed with guests. The grand hall bustled with activity as hundreds of guests mingled within. Butlers gracefully walked around, presenting silver trays laden with drinks and snacks. Among them, cadets her age strolled about, engaging in superfluous conversations with their peers. The fake smiles and fake laughs. Evelyn could see it from a glance. Being the daughter of a Viscount family, she was used to such scenes. It was something that she had grown accustomed to. But even so, she felt her chest grow heavy. The very air around her felt suffocating, and breathing was starting to become difficult. It's normal. I have to get used to this. Her social anxiety was acting up again. Pinching her hand, she bit on her lips and once again took in the fake expressions of all those around her. It left a sour feeling in her heart. Especially when. Hello, it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm Killian J. Marlin. It's an honor to become acquainted with someone from Haven. She was no different than them. Putting on a smile, she returned the greeting. The pleasure is mine. I closed my eyes and let the memories sink into my mind. The faces, the time, the silence. I recalled everything before opening my eyes again. What greeted my sight was the same environment as the vision. Things were slightly different as the events had yet to unfold, but everything was practically the same. Sip. Taking a sip of my drink, I quietly watched my surroundings. It was hard to not stand out on such an occasion, with multiple individuals trying to strike up a conversation with me. Hell. Busy. Nice to. No. I thought about engaging with them for a short moment but decided otherwise. Such fake pleasantries were meaningless to me. All I cared about was my greed. I needed to quench it. The idea of not being able to quench it seemed to eat at me. The bone. I have to have it. I closed my eyes and took another sip. I've got 30 minutes left. The event in the vision plays at 8:03 p.m. There was a massive clock by the wall. It was thanks to it that I was able to know the exact time the event was going to start. However, the vision started after the search, meaning that the event started slightly before 8:03 p.m. In my estimate, taking into account that everyone had to be checked, my estimate was 10 minutes. The event. It was going to start in 10 minutes. Phew. I felt a strange sense of nervousness all of a sudden. I was taking a big risk. There was a chance that my actions would lead to me becoming what became of Evelyn in the vision. A criminal. The thought made me realize I was walking on thin ice. My heart quickened and my palms felt sweaty. Nervousness finally started to settle within me. However, I was quick to push it down. Since the moment that I had appeared in this world, I had been walking on thin ice. My situation was no different than it had always been. If anything, I had gotten better at walking in such a situation. My worries. They were meaningless. I shifted my attention away from my drink and back into the hall. My eyes wandered around until they found a set of familiar purple hair. Surrounded by over 3 different people, she casually conversed with them. Does she have it or not? There was no way I could confirm this unless I directly checked her purse. But that in itself was a risk. What if she didn't have it in the purse just yet? I checked the time. 7:45 p.m. I started to move. Wherever I walked, I felt gazes directed my way. I let them be and continued forward. I'm envious of your talent. Surely, you'll be able to rank high in the draft at the end of the year. I hope that I too will reach a high rank. When you become successful, make sure you don't forget me. I won't. I only stopped when I found a familiar back. The conversation died and all eyes fell on me. Julian. Evelyn seemed especially shocked by my appearance. I glanced at the people gathered around her before returning my attention. I need to talk to you. As if I had said the most shocking thing, her eyes widened. You. I continued to stare at her silently. Eventually, she pursed her lips and nodded her head. With a polite smile, she dismissed the cadets around her before following me toward a more secluded part of the hall. She was the first one to break the silence. I didn't need saving. Saving? From what? She frowned and insisted. Really? I became even more confused but nodded. If you say so. I thought she would be satisfied with that, but it only deepened her frown. You're wrong. I really didn't need you to save me. I could have handled the situation well. I continued to nod along. Sure. You. But it seemed it only irritated her further. Clenching her teeth, she looked around before leaning closer to whisper. I no longer have social anxiety. I've fixed that 5 years ago. I'm no longer the same person. Don't misunderstand. Oh, okay. Social anxiety. That was a new piece of information to me. Still, seeing her so desperately trying to justify herself before me felt rather funny. For a moment, I almost lost my composure and laughed. But as I reminded myself of the situation, I recomposed myself and looked toward her purse. Your purse. Care to open it up? I swear, She blinked several times. Then, as if processing my words, her expression crumbled. I stopped her before she could say anything. You were right. Someone was watching you. Her expression changed. Be subtle when opening your purse. It's probably hidden somewhere, but it's there. What is? I didn't answer and moved closer, using my back as some form of shield. Be quick. You what? Check. I cut her off again. Her expression changed yet again, but as if noticing the seriousness in my tone, she lowered her head and subtly opened her purse. Fine. As she gritted her teeth, she added. But if there's really nothing, see what I'll do to you. A strange silence took over our area as Evelyn rummaged through her purse. Seconds ticked, and she had continued to rummage through. I felt my chest heave with unease with each second that passed. Doubtful thoughts started to cross my mind. Is it really going to be there? What if it's not there? Was I too hasty? Should I have waited more? Such thoughts were broken by a strange noise that came out of Evelyn's mouth. When I looked down, I saw her holding a familiar orb. My mind immediately raced at the sight of it. It's here. It had really happened. What? This? With a clear look of shock and disbelief, Evelyn held the orb in her hand. Her expression was reminiscent of the one she had made in the vision. However, ignoring it, I reached out for her hand and snatched it. Hey, you. Stay quiet if you don't want things to blow over. Wha? I looked around me. There were a few gazes on me. Some from cadets and some from older gentlemen. I made sure to memorize the faces of each and every one that was looking at me. Then, just as I was prepared to leave, a hand reached out to grab me by the arm and pulled me back. I don't know what's going on, but it's best if you hand that over to the STA. It's already too late for that. I nudged my chin toward the distance. Several guards were already starting to show strange movements. Her grip loosened from there. I thought she'd let go of me from that point, but just when I thought I could move, her grip once again tightened. About what I said before. I really don't have social anxiety. Oh. Why don't you believe me? I believe you. Her expression contorted, but she eventually let me go. I silently shook my head before moving away from her. There was still one thing left that I needed to do. But I didn't have much time left. The guards were already showing signs of movement, and with the bone on me, I knew that if I failed on my next step, I was done for. Therefore, I hurried my steps. Gradually, a figure appeared in the distance. He was talking with several people, and held a rather lofty position. He stood tall with skinny facial contours, jet black hair, a long nose, and bushy eyebrows. A face that I couldn't forget even if I wanted to. As his voice boomed down, forcing down judgment on Evelyn, I had a hard time forgetting his face. Since coming to the decision to take the bone for myself, there was one part that I found particularly difficult to figure out. How exactly would I be able to sneak the bone out of the venue? With everyone being searched so thoroughly, how could it be possible for me to smuggle the bone out? It was then that I had a sudden thought. Is everyone really going to be searched? Sure, he might be able to search every single person in the room, but in fact, there was one person he most likely wouldn't search. Who exactly? Himself. Right. Because he knew that he wasn't the culprit. Ha ha. It was a daring idea. One that made me want to laugh at how ridiculous it was. But staring at the guards that were slowly starting to walk his way, I grabbed the nearest drink to me and approached. I had just moved a few meters away from him, when... Oh! Splash! I suddenly tripped, spilling the drink all over him. Ah! As I glanced up, a pair of eyes met mine, their gaze bearing down on me. His black blazer was drenched, creating an eerie stillness in the surrounding space. My face felt rigid, and my mouth moved soundlessly before finally finding my voice. I apologize. It was a mistake. I was quick to react. My initial action was to gently remove the drink from his grasp and set it down on the nearby table. Then, I retrieved a tissue and proceeded to delicately pat down his clothes. The ground was slippery and... It's fine. He held out his hand to stop me and smiled. The tension that hung around the surroundings eased from that moment. Looking up to address the other present, he started to speak in a warmer tone. It was an accident. There's no need for you to worry. The jacket isn't even that expensive. Ah, but at least let me repay you. It's all right. But... this much is nothing. Please be at ease. I've long heard of your reputation. Take it as a token of friendship from me. Ah, but... I insisted several times, but he refused me each time. In the end, I had no choice but to stop. I could more or less tell he was starting to grow annoyed by my responses. Thankfully, he had managed to recognize my identity and wasn't overly harsh to me. Rather, he seemed keen on using the opportunity to build a connection with me. There were perks to being the Black Star. Be more careful next time. I understand. I lowered my head to apologize again. Just as I did, the guards finally caught up to him and whispered something in his ear. His expression shifted immediately. Then, if you'll excuse me for a brief moment. Under my watchful eyes, he picked up his glass and tapped it with his finger. Ting! Ting! The noise managed to reach the ears of all present. The noise in the hall quieted down, and all eyes fell on him. Clearing his throat, he smiled. Ladies and gentlemen, there seems to have been an accident. His voice quietly traveled throughout the hall. With the same calming smile, he went on to explain the situation. It's with regret that I have to inform you that one of the prized items of the auction house has been stolen. The reports have come just now, and we still believe that the culprit is hiding amongst one of us. He went on to press his hand against his chest as his head lowered a little. Therefore, I hope that with some understanding, you won't mind if we search all the guests present. I humbly ask as the head chief of the auction house. A strange silence followed shortly after before the entire hall erupted into noise. A thief? If that's the case, then I don't see why I should disagree. I've got nothing to hide. Are you saying that you're going to keep us here until everyone is searched? Is this even possible? I refuse to be searched. The response was a mix of protests and agreements. But it was only after the members of the 15 guilds came up to voice out their support that the noise died down. We agree with the search. We've got nothing to hide. Please don't mind us. Search as you want. Has he bought them? Seeing the strange looks he was giving to the representative members of the guild, it seemed like a plausible idea. Or at least, the auction house and the guilds were on extremely good terms. In any case, guards started to pour in from all entrances, blocking people from leaving. Shortly after, someone came to my side. "Please." The head chief concluded with another bow. "Thank you for your understanding." The search continued for the next half hour. Despite the many protests from the guests and members of the academies, they went to deaf ears and the search continued. "How is the situation?" Overlooking the situation, the head chief frowned. It was taking a lot longer than he expected. It couldn't be that the thief had escaped. But how was it possible? The moment the item had been stolen, all exits had been blocked and all the guests present had been kept. The likelihood that the thief had escaped was slim. "Head chief, we still have found nothing. Most of the guests are showing signs of dissatisfaction. Especially those that have been cleared of suspicions. We've also searched the surroundings and found nothing." Frowning, the head chief massaged his chin. How troublesome. All guests had certain standings within the empire. Their actions were the equivalent of offending such high-class people. Thankfully, given their great relationship with the 15 guilds, the situation had not turned out for the worst, but for how long could he keep it like that? If things progressed at this rate, then there was a chance that he might end up offending several big shots at once. He had to hurry up. He didn't have much time. Though the item stolen was expensive and would lead to substantial losses, it was something he could take given the circumstances. He'd much rather want to keep the guests happy than lose out on the money. Money could always be made. Connections. That was much harder. But of course, if he could, he'd like to find the culprit. What sort of person would not care about catching the thief who had stolen from them? See what happens when I catch that bastard. His grip on his drink tightened at the thought. However, if they still couldn't find the culprit before the situation turned out like that, he would have no choice but to give up. Just where could it be? The head chief felt his head throb, and his head turned to face a young man not so far from where he was. He currently was getting his body checked, but from how the guards were responding, he didn't seem to be guilty. Even so, seeing his face, the head chief silently clicked his tongue. An idiot. Such was his evaluation of the Haven Black Star. Who would have thought he'd be such an idiot? Recalling how his blazer had been smeared with his drink, the head chief felt his lips twitch. The suit wasn't cheap. He had only lied to maintain his image. It was in fact extremely expensive. If it weren't for his position as the Black Star, then… The head chief felt his hand suddenly pause, and his expression changed. He looked around him. All guards were busily patting down and checking the items of all guests present. A sudden thought struck him then, and he put the drink in his hand down. The way he looked at the cadet near him changed as he tried to recall the incident. Out of nowhere, he had suddenly tripped over and spilled his drink on him. Thereafter, he went on to try to dry his clothes. Blinking his eyes, he almost found himself laughing. Right. Of course. Why didn't he think about it? Of all the people present, who was the most likely person to not get checked? Ha ha. He laughed out loud then. Turning his attention toward one of the nearest guards, he extended his hands. Search me too. Yes. The guard seemed taken aback, but he didn't mind. Nudging with his chin, the head chief's gaze wandered back to the young man as his eyes narrowed. If his guesses were correct, then he had found his culprit. Pat. The search took quite a bit. Patting down our bodies and using a strange item while doing so, it felt as though every part of my body was being checked. Most likely, the device helped to detect through the human flesh. In the off chance the thief swallowed the item, then they'd be able to tell. Pat. My arms were pressed. Pat. My legs were pressed. Pat, pat. My pockets were checked. I remained silent the entire time, and kept my heart beating at a steady state. Especially when I felt a certain gaze directed toward me. I felt the back of my hair stand under such gaze. My palms were sweaty, and I had a strange urge to fidget my hand. Even so, I kept myself from showing any noticeable reaction until the search was finally over. It looks like you're good to go. Nothing has been found on you. Only then did I finally step back. As I turned my head, I found myself locking eyes with another individual, causing a subtle tightening of my expression. He was looking at me with a gaze that seemed to say, "I've got you." I wondered what he was on about at first, but after seeing that he was also getting searched, I understood. Ah! I covered my mouth at that moment. Swallowing my saliva, I forced myself to remain composed and stood still. My left hand twitched, and I wasn't able to stop my fingers from fidgeting together. Such action was caught by his gaze as just faintly, the end of his lips curled. "You, there." Finally, he called out for me. I didn't respond immediately and pursed my lips. He nudged me with his finger. "Come here." His voice came out dry and commanding. I swallowed before following his instructions and moved near him, only stopping at the opposite end of the table where a drink filled with ice appeared. I unconsciously reached out for it, and he didn't stop me. Rather, he seemed to enjoy my actions. "There's no need to be nervous." His gaze wandered toward the guards that surrounded him, as they were busily checking every part of his body. Pat, pat. They carried a similar procedure to the one mine, patting his body all over and paying special attention to the blazer. I felt my expression stiffen further as my grip on the glass tightened. His voice once again reached me. "Do you want to come clean?" I tilted my head and he leaned closer. "If you come clean now, the situation will end more nicely. I'm currently not accusing you because I have no evidence. However..." He suddenly smiled. "Even though you're trying your best, I can see just how nervous you are. If you just come CLE. Chief." His sentence was abruptly cut off by one of the guards. As he looked to meet his gaze, his expression quickly changed the moment he spoke. "There's nothing. You're also clear." "Ah." As if not expecting such an answer, his eyes widened and his expression crumbled. I stared at the scene from the opposite side of the table before lowering my head to stare at my drink. "Are you sure there's nothing wrong? Did you check correctly?" His voice faded in the background as I stared at the drink in my hand. Or more specifically, one of the ice cubes inside. It blended in so nicely. I blankly stared at the cubes for a few more seconds before bringing the drink closer to my lips. Gulp. Fucking idiot. I once used to be a salesman. Nothing. Are you sure there's nothing? Learning to be able to read, or predict the actions of individuals I knew nothing about was something that had been engraved in me since my work days. Our job consisted of doing whatever was possible to convince an unknown party to purchase the product that we were selling. All means to attract sales were considered usable in such an industry, even if we ended up resorting to underhanded methods in the process. It was thanks to such an environment that I was able to more or less predict how one would react given certain circumstances. Who would have thought such a skill would come in handy in a different world? We've checked again, there is really nothing. Check again. Yes. I watched as the head chief patted his blazer and clothes in confusion. I stared at the scene in complete silence while swallowing the bone down my throat. It hurt a little, but I kept my expression firm and prevented myself from showing anything on the outside. Having been cleared of all suspicion, I was now free to take the bone. I had been waiting for this opportunity from the start. Since the beginning. All of it had been flowing as I thought it would. The way he behaved and reacted. It was in line with how I envisioned he'd act. And it made sense. My actions. They followed a certain sequence that prompted one to act in such a way. What were the chances of me suddenly spilling the drink all over him before the guards suddenly came to alert him? Added to the fact that I was tapping his body in an attempt to dry his clothes, it made sense for him to grow suspicious. I wasn't naive enough to think that the head chief would fall for such a simple trick. It would be a little too obvious. Which was why I never intended his blazer to be my target. From the start, all of it was a cover-up for my real target. Sip. His drink. I swallowed and let the drink flow down my throat. The bone was the size of a small pebble, and while it wasn't completely transparent, it perfectly blended with the ice cubes within the red drink. Unless one paid close attention to it, they wouldn't notice. And how would the head chief notice it when he was busy investigating the theft? Diverting all my attention towards the jacket, I was able to slip the bone into his drink. As I said before, there was no better target than the head chief. He may have had the guard check him after he recalled my actions, but unlike the other guests, where everything had been checked, from drinks to bodies, he only had his body checked. It made perfect sense when taking into account that perhaps he hadn't even noticed his drink had been taken away by him in that instant that I spilled the drink over him. Compared to how extravagant the tapping was in contrast to how I had taken the drink away from him, it was only natural that he didn't take it into consideration. I had purposely diverted his attention away with my actions to make it slip his mind. Sort of like how most magicians trick their audience in shows. Only that I was no magician. Hoo! I took a breath as I finally finished the drink in my hand and placed it down on the table again. Even now, as I stared at it, I could see it trembling. The nervousness had been real, and even now I could feel the beat of my heart drumming in my mind. In the end, while the plan was far from perfect, things panned out as I expected them to. The bone. It was finally in my possession. My plan had worked. But it's not over yet. As I said before, I wanted everything. From quest to bone. So far, I have only managed to achieve 2 of the 3 things that I wanted. There was one thing left for me to do. Ha! I let out a small breath and closed my eyes. Unmask the fraud. You're good to go. There is nothing on you. Thank you. Evelyn pursed her lips and took a step back. Her thoughts were in disarray, but she didn't show it outwardly. All she could think of at the moment was Julian. Why? Why did he do that? For what reason did he go out of his way to help her? It made no sense to her. It couldn't be because he still cared about her, right? Evelyn swallowed and pursed her lips. The idea seemed impossible, and she knew herself that it was impossible, and yet. Why did she continue to have such thoughts? It was obvious why. It was because that was what she'd like to believe. That perhaps, he wasn't the heartless monster that she had seen. That there was perhaps still something in his broken self. Something that could still be salvaged. Evelyn. Her thoughts were broken by a quiet voice. When she turned around, Leon appeared, standing beside her. He stood quietly with his gaze fixed on her. Are you okay? Evelyn opened her mouth but found herself unable to say anything. She eventually lowered her head and nodded her head. I'm fine. Was what she was trying to imply with her actions. Her odd behavior didn't go unnoticed by Leon, who frowned at the sight of her and leaned his head forward. What happened? No, it's... What happened? He cut her off decisively, leaving her with no room to say anything else. It was at that moment that Evelyn realized she couldn't fool him and bitterly smiled. It's Julian. She spoke slowly, keeping her head down. Do you think he can be saved? Her response was met with silence. When she looked up, she was surprised to see Leon staring at her with a complicated expression. Then, with a long sigh, he shook his head. No. He decisively said. Almost too decisively. He can no longer be saved. Ah. Evelyn felt a little part of her tear. especially when she noticed the strained expression on Leon's face as he talked about him. It's too late for that. The Julian you remember. That we remember. He's no longer in this world. He paused before adding. Think of him as a stranger. After another half-hour elapsed and the guest's patience wore thin, the head chief decided to halt the investigation. It appears we've detained you all for too long. My apologies for the inconvenience. Regrettably, we couldn't identify the culprit, he announced, maintaining his professional demeanor. With a slight bow, he went on to add. As a token of apology, for all the guests that were inconvenienced by our actions, the auction will offer a 10% discount on any of the products available from us. Only then did the people in the hall calm down. It had to be noted that a 10% discount was a large sum of money given how expensive some of the items listed in the auction house were. Such a reward was enough to wash all pent-up resentment away. It was a small price the head chief was willing to pay in order to keep the people in the hall happy. A smile marred his features when he saw the pleased expressions of the guests, and only then did he finally allow for the guests to be escorted out of the premise. Though the circumstances made the night sour, I hope you have all enjoyed yourselves. Once again, we apologize for any inconvenience. One by one, the guests started to move out in an orderly line. As the guests departed in an orderly procession, a man clad in a butler uniform joined the line, then discreetly veered off into a dim corridor. Talk, talk. His steps echoed throughout the otherwise quiet corridor as his calm expression changed. Failed. The plan had failed. The butler's expression distorted at the thought. How could the plan they had been working on for so long fail like that? Everything had been flowing smoothly up until the very last moment. While he wasn't exactly sure about what had happened since he hadn't managed to see it, he more or less had an idea. Julian Dacre Ivinus. The Black Star. He had interfered with their plans. It could only have been him. I have to report this. The situation was serious. How did he find out about the plan? Why did he interfere? How much does he know? Talk, talk. Questions continued to flood the butler's mind as he continued to move along the quiet corridor. The plan. It was supposed to be perfect. For the Black Star to interfere in the matter suggested that there was a chance he knew something about them. And even if he didn't and had acted out of impulse, which seemed improbably given their investigation of him and his relationship with her, it was vital that he report the situation to the higher-ups. They couldn't allow for unknown variables to interfere with their plans. Not when they were so close to accomplishing their goals. Not why. Mid-stride, the ground beneath him shifted abruptly, and unseen hands erupted from below, seizing his ankles in a tight grip. Ugh! In an instant, a wave of weakness swept through his body, causing his balance to falter. What? Talk. A single step shattered the silence as a dry voice cut in from behind him. Where do you think you're going? How was I so sure that he didn't have any powers? The answer was obvious. No superhuman would work as a butler for an auction house, and given that we had all been checked just a few moments ago, had he been a superhuman, it would have surely been detected by the guards present. Thud. And as expected, my deductions proved correct when his body fell to the ground. A strange silence enveloped the surroundings. Only then did I sigh in relief and approach. Of course, I made sure to keep my guard up. Who knew if this was an act or not? Thankfully, I didn't come to this situation blindly. If things went south, I still had a means to escape. That said, the aftermath of such action wasn't something I was planning on dealing with. I had just taken a step forward when something flickered in my vision. Evelyn's fate has been slightly altered. The assailant was found dead in the corridor of the auction house. The future is changing. Main quest activated, prevent the calamities from awakening or dying. Calamity 1, slumber. Progress, 0%. Calamity 2, slumber. Progress 2%. Evelyn J. Verlis, slumber. Progress 0%. My eyes widened at the sight of the third option. It no longer says Calamity 3. It now had a specific name. Before I could process what was going on, my eyes flickered as another window appeared. Game progression EXP plus 1%. Game progression 0%-2%, 100%. Character progression EXP plus 5%. EXP 0%, 39%, 100%. A familiar warm current ran through my body, and I felt my mana reserves increase. Although it wasn't much, it was still something. However, despite the sudden increase in strength, I was anything but happy. Quite frankly, I wasn't sure how to feel. While I was happy with the increase in strength, I was also apprehensive about it. While my body accepted it, my mind rejected it. I still didn't trust this system, or whatever it was. What was its goal, and what did it want from me? I felt more satisfaction working for my own power than relying on this system for it. I felt more in control that way. As if I was controlling my own path rather than someone else doing that for me. At the very least, just as it could give me power, it could take it away from me. I didn't want to be overly reliant on such a system. There was also another thing that bothered me. The assailant was found dead in the corridor of the auction house. I stood in silence, chewing on the words displayed in front of me, before casting my gaze downward to the butler's lifeless body. He wasn't moving at all. Get up. I tried using emotive magic, but even that aroused no reaction from him. Get up. Regardless of how many times I tried, it just wouldn't budge. I clenched my teeth and took a deep breath. This was the second time that I had witnessed death in this life. It wasn't as jarring as the first time, mainly because it wasn't as gruesome. In a sense, I also felt a sense of relief in the way he died. He had most likely killed himself the moment that I had attacked, but regardless of how things were going to work out, I would have had no choice but to kill him. I knew that he knew about me. The only reason I was sure he had been the one to create this entire situation was because I had been eyeing Evelyn most of the time. The only person who could have implanted the bone into her purse was him. He was also one of the few faces I remembered starting at me back in the hall, when I was talking to Evelyn. His death merely served to confirm the obvious. Hoo! Taking a look around me, I took another deep breath and moved toward the corpse. I closed my eyes and started to pat his body to see if he had anything on him. Any clues? Items? Or anything of the sort. However, nothing. Regardless of how much I looked, he had nothing on him. I searched all his pockets, and besides a few tissues, he had nothing on him. Absolutely nothing. I was unsure of how to feel. I was mainly disappointed. I thought I'd be able to find some clues regarding the situation, and some items that I could use, but when thinking about it, he wasn't even a superhuman. Why would he have anything on him? Plus, we had all been checked beforehand. There was simply no way he'd have anything of value on him. Once again, silence gripped my surroundings. I stared at the body in front of me for a few seconds before flipping it over. My hands twitched, and I felt my knee shake a little. But I ignored the weird sensations and brought my hand toward his throat. I felt his throat at my hands. It was large, and I felt my heart race. Adrenaline was coursing down my body, and my hands felt tingly. The next thing I knew, I was squeezing. I squeezed as tightly as I could. He was dead. The notifications suggested it. But I didn't trust it. I wanted to make sure that was the case. What if he was using some sort of ability to make himself look dead? I couldn't allow even the slightest chance of that happening. Therefore, even as my stomach churned and I felt disgusted by my actions, I increased my grip on his throat. Despite doing the choking, it felt as if I was the one being choked. I felt suffocated, and at some point, my hands started to tremble. But I persisted. In the silence, I continued to press my hands over his neck and squeezed with everything that I had. Thud. H-A-A-A. H-A-A-A. By the time that I stopped, my breathing was rough. I knew that I didn't have much time left, and that I needed to leave. Given the circumstances, there were bound to be people coming soon. Thankfully, with everyone having moved toward the main hall after the incident, the area was still somewhat deserted. Hoo! Recomposing myself, I stood up and fixed my clothes. The entire time, I kept my eyes lingering on the corpse. If he wasn't dead before, I was sure he was now. I imprinted the sight in my mind. I killed him. I told myself that it wasn't going to be the last time I would kill someone. That much I knew and understood. Which was why I burned the image and emotions I was currently feeling in my mind. Once again, I reminded myself of my new identity and situation. Slap. I slapped myself once in the face to remind myself of that fact. Only then did I calm down. I was just about to stand up when I noticed something and squinted my eyes. It was dark, so I couldn't see properly. But there was something that grabbed my attention. I slowly rolled up the butler's sleeve to get a better look. When I did, my eyes widened and my heart, which had just steadied, jumped up. A familiar tattoo. One that I had. 4 identical leaves. All in black. What is? The journey back to Haven felt like a blur. None of the cadets spoke throughout the entire way back, and the professor was busy handling reports and calls from the other professor at the academy to care about us. I was fine with such development. I was in no state to talk with anyone. The only thing in my mind was the image of the butler's tattoo. Rolling up my sleeves, I stared at mine. It was identical in every way. Perhaps the only difference between my tattoo and theirs was that mine was glowing. At least to me. From an outsider's point of view, mine was also not glowing. I was the only one that could see the glowing. What is the meaning of this? A wave of questions flooded my mind. They just endlessly poured into my mind like the water from a broken dam. What was the meaning of the tattoo, and why did the butler have it? Was it some twisted coincidence and the two did not correlate? As if I wasn't naive enough to think that there was something more to it. I was sure. But what exactly? He had died before I could find any information. I had been so shocked by the development that I had only snapped out of it when I heard the sound of footsteps coming from behind me. Only then did I wake up and hide the body away before joining back with the group. Thankfully, nobody asked about my whereabouts when I returned. I had only been gone for less than 5 minutes. It wasn't suspicious enough to gather their interest. And in some way, most didn't have the courage to ask. Most weren't on good enough terms with me. I guess there were perks to being antisocial. Still, I once again stared at my forearm. My thoughts kept wandering back toward the tattoo. Just what connection does it have with the one that I have? It felt as though I had finally found something. An idea to chase after. Only for me to find that the path was just as dark as the other ones that I had been following. Just how would I be It was at that moment that I recalled something. A certain conversation I had a while back. In fact, there was someone else that knew about the tattoo. Or had asked me about it. I hadn't thought much about it back then, but Delilah. She definitely knew something. What if? Talk. Calm and even steps. They moved toward a small building where several people were gathered. All eyes fell on the dark-robed man as he entered and took off his top hat. Their expressions immediately shifted, and they all lowered their heads to address him respectfully. Inquisitor Hallow. Inquisitor. But he paid them no attention. His eyes fell on the naked corpse that lay in the middle of the table. A middle-aged man wearing formal attire stepped up to explain. "We've found him like this after the guests were all let out. We believe it to have happened in less than 5 minutes after we let them out. We were only able to find the corpse after one of our staff went in to clear the rooms." He then went on to point toward the neck of the perpetrator. "If you look at his neck, we believe that he died from strangling." Yet again, the inquisitor remained silent. He inched closer to the naked corpse in front of him, and placed his hand over its chest. "Inquisitor." Just when the others were questioning his actions, he finally spoke. "He didn't die due to suffocation." But. He tilted his head and frowned. "I sense traces of curse magic. Faint, but I can sense them." But even that isn't enough to kill him. They're too faint." A low-tier mage. A picture of the scene replayed in the Inquisitor's mind. It was a scene he more or less was certain of. He went on to open the eyes of the corpse before nodding. "This guy killed himself." "Killed himself? What?" But. His conclusion drew the shock of all those present, but as the Inquisitor's eyes wandered to the forearm of the victim, his expression changed slightly. "Yes, he killed himself." He was even more sure of it now. The picture in his mind became clearer. Curse magic was used to detain him. However, before he could get anything answered, this guy killed himself. The strangling is probably something that was done to make sure he was dead. Quite meticulous. A subtle praise. But that was all. He shifted his eyes away from the corpse and turned around. Inquisitor. My job is done here. I more or less understand what happened. But what about the thief?" "Thief?" The Inquisitor blinked. Then, recalling the information he received from Central, he subtly smacked his forehead. "Right." He pointed at the corpse. "It's probably him." Before the people present in the room could even say anything back, he put his hat back on and pulled the door open. "If you would excuse me. I have a place to be." A place he looked forward to visiting. An interesting place. He stepped outside of the premises. Just before leaving, he left a few last words. "Well. Probably." It was the next day, and I came out of the bathroom holding onto a familiar-looking orb. I set it down on the desk and sat on a chair where I took a book and opened it. For now, I decided to set aside the problem regarding the tattoo on my hand. While there was indeed a chance that Delilah knew about my situation. No, she probably knows. It made no sense for someone as powerful as her not to know about such an organization. It was probably why she had mentioned my tattoo back then. If I were to ask, she'd probably be able to give me an answer, but... Ha ha. I suddenly laughed. Leaning back on my chair, a few things made sense to me. So that's why she made me her assistant. It wasn't because I was weak, or whatever excuse she had told me back then. Far from it. She wants to monitor me. That much became clear to me after thinking about the situation. This tattoo I had. While there was a chance that I was wrong, I was inclined to believe that my deduction was correct. Now that brought rise to several more questions. How much did she know? What sort of organization was this? Did she think I was part of that organization? If so, is she my ally or enemy? How troublesome. My head throbbed the more I thought about the matter. The situation became even more complicated. Another reason why I decided to hold off on meeting her. Until I knew what her stance was, I planned on taking my time to observe the situation. I shifted my attention toward the book in my hand, Bone Classification and Their Usage. It was a book that was given to us as part of our course selection. That turned out for the best, since borrowing from the library would have been problematic. Especially if someone came to investigate the academy and found that right after coming back from the auction the first thing I did was research bones. Talk about suspicious. Flip. I flipped through the pages of the book and started to read. I knew the general information, but that wasn't enough. I needed to know more. Which was what I did. Introduction, dimensional bones and their usages. There were 3 sections in the table of contents. Ranks and classifications, usage and integration, and types. For the next hour or so I absorbed all the information in the book before finally summarizing all the information in my mind. I took a pen and jotted everything down. Ranks. Bones were ranked based on the rank of the originating monster. An infant rank monster produced an infant rank bone, and so on. Primordial ranked monsters existed, but no such bone had ever been found. The greater the strength of the monster, the more powerful the ability. Types. The human body could only accept a maximum of 5 bones, and once integrated couldn't be taken out any more and the body would break down. There were only 7 types of bones that could be integrated into the human body: skull bone, rib bone, ulna bone, femur bone, pelvis bone, vertebrae bone, and lastly mandible bone. My pen stopped there and I shifted my attention toward the orb on my side. Lastly, integration. This way, right. I pinched the orb in between my fingers and channeled my mana into it. The orb glowed a white hue as the room turned bright all of a sudden. A magic circle floated in the air. It lasted several seconds before shattering. Then, thud. A long black bone fell onto the table with a dull thud. No wonder it looked so small. In reality, it was merely a container for the actual bone, which was about the size of my thigh. I carefully observed the bone in front of me and stepped back. There was a certain aura that radiated from it that made me feel uncomfortable. It made my face winch. Not only that, but the smell it gave out was also anything but pleasing. Still, after a careful look, I was able to understand what bone it was. The right ulna. The bone right beneath the forearm. The rank also seems to be junior rank. The bone belonged to a metral, which was typically known to be a junior ranked monster. Even if it wasn't, the book stated that bones from Terra rank and up glowed and were extremely mana dense. This one wasn't, so it was fair to assume it was a junior rank bone. Maybe infant, but I doubted it was given the price. For a junior rank bone to be this expensive. Just how ludicrous were the prices for higher ranked bones? The thought made me want to puke. I really needed to find a way to make more money. My progress would surely increase then. I took a deep breath and reached out for the bone. The steps for integration were rather straightforward. Place the bone on the respective area, and create a mana flow between the two. While I understood the principle behind the integration, I wasn't exactly confident I could pull it off. I still tried nonetheless. I followed the usual steps. Focusing my attention on my core, a certain warmth invaded my body. I guided it toward the bone in my grasp. I felt my brows furrow. There was a little resistance from the bone at first, but with the passing of seconds, it started to accept my mana. The first step that I needed to do was assimilation. In short, I needed to get the bone used to my mana. This was a necessary step before the integration part. So I decided to be patient. This wasn't going to be an easy step. I was right. The assimilation process was taking a little longer than I expected. However, as I glanced at the clock, I smiled. It was Sunday. I had all the time in the world. In total, it took about 30 more minutes for me to finally be able to smoothly channel my mana into the bone. As soon as I reached that stage, I let out the breath I held in. It was now time for me to move toward the most important part. Integration. This process was also not very complicated. However, the book described this next stage as the hardest. Not because it was hard to do, but because of the pain one would experience during the integration. It was for this reason that the Institute tested one's pain tolerance. Unless one reached a score of 3, they wouldn't allow any of the cadets to try to integrate with a bone without any assistance. But to me, that didn't matter. 3, 4, 5, 6. So long as my body didn't fail me, it was nothing. Pain. It was something I could deal with. So, I didn't hesitate with the next step. The bone stuck to my forearm and an excruciating pain invaded my body. The pain was hard to describe. It felt as if the bones on my forearm had gotten crushed by a large boulder as it fell. The muscles twisted and squirmed as a result, and the bone attached itself to my skin. Creak. Crack. The sounds that came out of my forearm were all for me to hear. My lips trembled and my heart squirmed in pain. The pain was something that I could vividly feel in my mind. But, even while getting baptized by this intense pain, I didn't let out a single sound. I simply refused to yield to the pain. Pain. It meant a lot to me. Having experienced it so much, I knew all sorts of pains. And screaming from this type of pain felt pathetic. There's worse. This is nothing. So, I stood in silence and watched as my forearm squirmed and spasmed. Creak. Crack. The sounds continued but nothing came out of my mouth. I wouldn't let myself let anything out. Such pain continued for the next hour. The entire time I stood motionless and took in the pain. Memorized it. So that the next time I experienced something similar, I could tell myself, I withstood this, why can't I withstand this? Snap. As I heard a loud snapping sound, a sense of weakness finally hit me. I stumbled several steps back before falling onto my chair. The world spun and the edges of my vision started to become dark. Gradually, the darkness spread, reaching down from all areas before finally taking away my sight. Even in such a state, I remained silent. I felt my right arm twitch and something came out. I wasn't sure what. I couldn't see. It took several minutes for my vision to return. When it did, I stared around me. All I saw were threads. They covered my surroundings, wrapping over the furniture and hanging suspended in the air. I sat there dazed for several seconds before swallowing and lowering my head to look at my forearm. A slender white thread extended from the underside of my forearm, looping over my arm, and dividing into 5 finer threads that wound around my fingers before darting out into the room. I had a hard time spotting the threads given how thin they were, but I could feel them. As though they were a part of my body, I knew exactly where each of them was. I hesitated to move from the spot. While I could feel every single thread in the room, I had no idea how to control them. Only when I closed my eyes did I get a better idea. So it works like this. Swoosh. The threads withdrew with a single thought from me. When I opened my eyes, the threads were no longer scattered around the room. In the end, it all depended on my mana control. The thought made me frown. There was a simple reason for this. My mana control was awful. To prove this, I closed my eyes and channeled the mana in my body. Then, mimicking what I had done before, I felt my forearm tingle and a connection established. A single white thread appeared in my darkened vision as I kept my eyes closed. Like a snake, I tried to direct it forward, but that proved to be a more difficult task than I expected as it continued to veer toward the left. Drip. Drip. Sweat trickled down the side of my face the more I focused on my task, and just as the thread inched forward a couple of meters, I had no choice but to cut my mana connection and open my eyes. I took a deep breath. Not only was it difficult to control, but it took a lot of mana too. I reached my hand forward and touched the thread that coiled around my fingers. Hiss. I drew a cold breath when I felt a sharp pain on my finger as a red line crossed down my finger. Sharp. I suddenly grew excited. This was what I had been missing the entire time. A skill that could complement my curse magic, which leaned more toward the support side like emotive magic. Not only was this skill great for offense, but it was also extremely important for control. If utilized properly, then I was sure my strength would increase drastically. At the very least, I wouldn't be so helpless. There was something else that I was curious about. Let me check my status. A familiar widow popped in front of me. Julian D. Ivinus. Level, 18, Tier 1 Magician. EXP, 0%-3%, 100%. My eyes immediately widened after staring at the first part. My level increased. I was no longer level 17, but level 18. What an unexpected development. I more or less expected it given that I felt my mana grow. But my surprise didn't end there. When I looked down, my eyes locked on the last section. Skills. Innate Foresight. Innate Etherweave. Julian D. Ivinus. So it's called Etherweave. My new ability. I opened my mouth for a moment before closing it. Interesting. Evelyn sat serenely in the lobby of the Rondio dorm, surrounded by three figures whose mere presence drew the curiosity of passers-by. They were none other than Josephine, Aoife, and Luxon. Within the common room, they were engrossed in their studies, preparing diligently for the upcoming exams in just a month's time. But not all were here to study. Did you guys hear? A person was found dead after the incident. Josephine, being the talker that she was, started the conversation off with some gossip regarding yesterday's incident. Only that nobody seemed interested in what she was talking about. Fiddling with the pen in his hand, Luxon casually replied. Yeah. I heard about it. What's with the lukewarm reaction? Weren't you there yesterday? It was in the same place you guys were in. Right. He still didn't seem interested. That was until Josephine took out a paper and placed it on the table. Look, it's this guy. Did you see him yesterday? Right, I want to Luxon stopped mid-sentence and his eyes widened. Isn't this? His reaction prompted the others to look, and Aoife's blank expression twitched slightly. Clearly, she too recognized the figure in the picture. The one who didn't show any reaction was Evelyn, who blankly stared at the article in front of her. She had actually seen the article beforehand. Therefore, it didn't come as a shock to her. However, the apparent cause of death is a suicide, yet traces of curse magic have been detected on the body. Her mind had been continuously haunted by one thought. He did it. Julian was the culprit. She was sure of it. It was a wild concussion that ate at her mind, but thinking about it, the butler was most likely the person who had planted the item in her purse. He was the one who wanted to screw her over. Even now, she didn't understand why she had been targeted. Was it because they had a grudge against her family? Evelyn. That could be a reason. Her family was rather influential, and it made sense for people to target her. It was because of this that she had her knight accompany her most of the time in the academy. But even so, to go as far to kill him. Evelyn was once again reminded of the past. A past that she wanted to forget. However, the more she tried to forget, the more it seeped into her mind. Like a curse, it wouldn't stop haunting her. Evelyn. It's too late for that. The Julian you remember. That we remember. He's no longer in this world. Think of him as a stranger. She reminded herself of Leon's words. What exactly did he mean by these words? Was he trying to say that the current Julian was someone different? Or that he had been consumed and fully turned into the monster they had seen? But if that was the case, why did he help her? Why? Evelyn. Evelyn felt her head snap up as her name was called out. When she looked around, she noticed that all eyes were gathered on her. Josephine neared her as she asked. Evelyn, are you okay? I've been calling you for the last minute. No, I'm fine. I'm not. I was just thinking about this question. She tapped her pen on the paper in front of her. Scratching the side of her face, Josephine's face twitched as she was reminded of their situation, and she sat back down on her seat. Right. We're here to study. Only then did she seem to recall the purpose behind their group and sighed. Fine. Evelyn stared at her for a brief moment before pursing her lips and paying attention to the question in front of her. Though he continued to haunt her mind, she had no choice but to pretend to be fine. At least, she had to pretend to be fine in front of everyone. She thought she was doing a good job at it, but what she didn't notice was the sudden squint of Aoife's eyes as she looked at her. Her yellow pupils flickered as she similarly lowered her head to focus on her paper. Scribble. In the newfound silence, the collective sound of their pens scratching their papers echoed throughout. A week later. It was now the Monday of the next week. The week passed without any hiccups. Attending lectures, training, and even more training. Such had been my life for the past week. I was content with such a life. Sort of. My progress had started to stagnate, and I was once again reminded of my lack of talent in the magic field. This will be the second time that you will all explore the mirror dimension. For the past 2 weeks, we've been preparing you for your current trip. Unlike last time, we will allow you freedom of travel. We stood by a familiar crack. There was a certain tension that hung in the air as all the cadets waited patiently for the professor to speak. I could feel the nervousness of some of the cadets beside me as they chewed on their nails. I couldn't blame them. We were currently headed into the deeper territory of the mirror dimension. Contrary to them, rather than being nervous, I was somewhat excited. I wanted to see the result of my training. To what extent had I improved over the past week? Of course, when I say freedom of travel, there will still be a limit to how far you can go. The black region is your limit. Going further into other regions is prohibited. We will not be responsible for your safety if you wander deep into those regions. The mirror dimension was classified into several regions which ranged from black, yellow, orange, and red. The black region stood as the safest domain, firmly under the Empire's control, boasting numerous supply stations strategically dispersed across its territory. The yellow region lay southward from the black region, inhabited by numerous terror-ranked monsters. Following the yellow region was the orange region, and lastly, the red region, an infamous no-man's land. You will be free to go in groups, or you may go alone. We suggest you go in groups, but if you don't want to, it's not a requirement. However, with that said, this isn't going to be a simple walk in the park. There are things that you must achieve during your excursion. Ah, there it was. The expected catch. Points will be assigned for each monster that is killed. Infant ranked will count 10 points. Junior ranked will count 100, but I don't see how any of you are capable of defeating such a monster at your current level. Perhaps if you work together, but the professor shrugged and ended things there. The meaning behind his words was clear. Now then. He called his hands and turned to face the crack. Let's head in. I expect great things from you all. I was just about to follow when I felt a hand press against my shoulder. When I turned around, I was surprised to see 2 gray eyes staring at me. You. His brows furrowed into a tight frown, his expression betraying his hesitation. But in the end, he managed to get his words out. And when he did, my brows jumped in surprise. Do you want to pair with me? You want to team up with me? I was somewhat confused by the sudden proposal. Of all people, I didn't expect Leon to be the one suggesting this. He was the one who usually avoided me when he could. Why the sudden change of heart? That was unless you need something from me. He remained silent, but that was all I needed to hear. No. Which was why I rejected him. I planned to make use of the time to practice my skills and train. I had no time for distractions. I thought that my message was clear, but just as I prepared to leave, Leon spoke. It'll be beneficial for you too. That's when my steps paused. Beneficial for me too. Suddenly, I recalled something. The game is called Rise of the Three Calamities, and the main character is called Leon. They were my brother's words before my death. Ah! It then clicked to me. This person was the main character. He was the character that the world was centered around. It didn't feel that way to me because I had been so focused on myself, but such was the reality of the situation. While his presence brought a lot of danger, it also brought a lot of opportunity. I may be taking this opportunity from other characters, but I don't particularly care. To begin with, I didn't know the plot of the game. Whether I changed the plot or not, I didn't care. But maybe I should. Would this affect the events that the quest window would display? Or would the quests adjust to the situation? It was certainly something to think about, but it didn't weigh heavily on my mind. If there was an opportunity, then I didn't plan on missing it. Even if it ended up screwing with whatever event that was going to happen in the future, I wasn't sure existed. So, I turned around to look at Leon. I'll listen. What sort of opportunity are you talking about? Whether it screwed with the future or not, I didn't care. I didn't live for the unknown future. I lived for the present. Leon stared at Julian's back as it disappeared into the crack. Shortly after he left, a figure walked up from behind him. Did he accept? It was none other than Aoife. Behind her were 4 other people, of which Leon only managed to recognize Evelyn and Luxon. He said he wanted a few days to himself. A day to himself. Aoife frowned, but before she could say anything, Leon cut in. I accepted. Aoife's eyebrows jumped a little, but they soon recovered. Are you sure? Sure. The conversation was supposed to end there, but a figure with long black hair jumped in on the conversation. Is it really a good idea to invite him? Leon looked towards him. Wesley Montague. One of the top rankers within the year. He was ranked within the top 10 the last time Leon recalled. But as Leon stared at him, he felt himself grow uncomfortable. He couldn't quite put it, but I don't like him. There was something about him that felt off to Leon. Still, considering that he had been chosen for the team, he pushed his feelings aside and asked. Why do you think so? Don't get me wrong. He is strong. However, he will be a burden to us. Monsters don't have emotions, and without emotions. Wesley ended his sentence there, but the meaning behind his words was clear for everyone to understand. Leon looked back to see the reaction of the other group members. Besides Aoife, who seemed unsure, and Evelyn, who seemed confused, they all shared the same opinion as Wesley. Leon sighed. Not because he didn't understand where they were coming from, but because his instincts told him otherwise. That if he didn't bring him, he'd regret it. But how could he explain this to them? In the end, frowning, Leon looked at Wesley and answered. Whether he'll be of use or not, we'll see later. For now, we will wait. Swoosh. Ah. TSK. I stood up and clicked my tongue. Another fail. Extending my hand, I withdrew the thread that extended from out of my forearm. I then sat in silence and stared at the distant creature running away from the area. It had been 2 hours since I had left the supply station at the Academy Gates entrance. I don't have much time. My appointment with Leon was set for exactly 3 days, Zone F. With our expedition lasting for about a week, 3 days was plenty of time for me to train and improve. The Black region was split into 7 different zones which went from A to G. Each zone contained a different environment and habitat. I was currently in Zone A, the safest of all the 7 zones. Such was my current limit. Besides my new ability and curse magic, I was practically defenseless against the monsters. I had no choice but to go to the safest zone. Thankfully, I'm not as helpless now. Swoosh. A thread coiled down from my forearm, slowly crawling toward the cracks of the rocky surface beneath. I used my mind to carefully guide the thread around the cracks and towards the distance where a furry creature stood. Aurorahemoth. Such was the name of the creature I was currently hunting. Despite its name, it was one of the weakest creatures found within the mirror dimension. With its tiny body and short limbs, it was essentially a standing target. It bore a resemblance to a rabbit, but it was a lot more grotesque in appearance. With its mouth split into 4 sections, revealing rows of razor-sharp teeth that twisted within its gaping maw, it was anything but cute. And yet... swoosh! I missed. Regardless of how much I tried, just when the thread would reach a certain distance, it would detect it and hop away. How troublesome. I wasn't disheartened by the failure. Though I kept on failing, I was getting closer and closer to the creature with each attempt. That wasn't all. I could feel my control over the thread to be smoother with each attempt. This was a great experience, but still too slow. The rate of progress was nice, but I was still not satisfied. I sat down on a nearby rock and stared into the sky. It was gray, and a white sun hung in the distance. The air was dry, and there was hardly any vegetation around me. I closed my eyes and let my mana course through my body before agglomerating towards the tip of my fingers. Rune 1, Rune 2, Rune 3, Rune 4, Rune 5, Rune 6, Rune 7, Rune 8, Rune 9, Rune 10, Rune 11. TZZZ. A familiar sound. Opening my eyes, I pursed my lips. That failed too. Nothing seemed to be going right for me. Chains of Alakantria. I was still struggling to unlock this spell. It was frustrating, but I had become numb to the sense of frustration. All I felt was frustration. Ha! As a hollow laugh escaped from my lips, I directed my attention toward the distance where another creature greeted my sight. I looked toward my arm and took a deep breath. Immediately, a thread coiled out of my forearm, coiling around my hand and splitting into 5 different threads. Drip. Sweat trickled down the side of my face the moment I split the threads. Accompanying the pain was a sharp pain. Having to split my attention 5 different ways was quite exhausting. Ignoring my eyelid which was twitching, I guided the 5 threads towards the creature in the distance. The distance between the creature and the creature shrank. 10 meters. 9 meters. 8 meters. Phew. Sweat continued to pour down from my face as my right eyelid twitched. The pain in my head intensified, and my jaw clicked. Even so, I persisted and separated the threads. I forced myself to suffer in silence as the threads split. Biting my lips, I imprinted the sight ahead in my mind. Then, closing my eyes and letting darkness embrace my vision, I envisioned a path for the threads which were the only things that appeared in my darkened vision. Like snakes, they coiled around the ground and neared the creature. 7 meters. 6 meters. 5 meters. Ah! I stopped right there and opened my eyes. The creature's ears perked up as its head raised to look around. Clearly, it had detected something but couldn't understand what. 5 meters. That was my current limit. My finger twitched. One of the threads lunged forward. As if expecting such action, the creature jumped ahead. Swoosh. But... Heek. It was surrounded. KH. My hand clenched tightly, urging the threads into action as they surged towards the creature. This time, there was no avenue of escape. With every path blocked and suspended midair, the creature could only observe helplessly as the threads ensnared its body, coiling around its limbs. Ha! I watched from the distance as the pain in my mind intensified. However, I ignored the pain and smiled. I did it. A wave of relief washed over me as my chest trembled. Heek! The creature continued to trash in the distance as the threads coiled around it. I was just about to put it out of its misery when I frowned. All of a sudden, I felt multiple pairs of eyes falling on me. When I turned around, I felt my body freeze. Tens of different pairs of eyes were staring at me. Their expressions were anything but friendly. I didn't let myself fall into panic and took a deep breath. The professor had warned beforehand that there was a likelihood of such a scenario occurring. It was for this reason that I wasn't panicked. Furthermore, Orohimithas weren't known for their speed. I'll probably be able to run away if I want to. But I clenched my teeth. For what reason did I need to run away? If I couldn't even handle such weak creatures, then how was I supposed to get stronger? I smacked the side of my head and took another deep breath. Right, whatever. Heek. Clenching my hand, the creature in the distance split into 10 different pieces. EXP plus 0.01%. The sudden notification that flashed before my very eyes took me by surprise. However, taking note of the advancing creatures, I put it to the side and recalled the threads back to me. This was probably going to hurt, but... Come. Swoosh. I stepped back to avoid an incoming attack as my eyes fell on the large rows of teeth facing me. I silently gulped. Would I even be able to keep my head if they managed to land a hit? Probably. But it would certainly deal a lot of pain. And while I could withstand pain, I didn't like pain. If possible, I wanted to avoid it. Therefore, I continued to avoid the incoming attacks while focusing on the threads coming out of my arm. There were a total of 3 at the moment. I thought about making more, but my mind couldn't keep up. There were too many things that I needed to focus on. My environment, the incoming Orohimithas, and my mana reserves. My mind couldn't keep up. 3 threads were my limit. I continued like this until I couldn't. Gradually, my steps halted and I looked around me. Heek. Heek. I was surrounded from all sides. Stepping above the scattered rocks around me, their glowing eyes fiercely stared at me. My heart sped at the sight of them, and I had a hard time keeping myself from panicking. But I had to stay calm. That much was necessary. 1, 2, 3, 15. 15 creatures surrounded me. The reality of the situation seemed even more grim than I had anticipated. For some reason, the creatures just stood and observed me. As if they were waiting for something. I didn't know exactly what, but I didn't let that affect my mind and introduced 2 more threads. Now that I didn't need to move, I could split my attention toward creating 2 more. Quietly, they coiled around my fingers before descending towards the ground, permeating through the cracked earth and positioning themselves along the perimeter where the rocks were. It all happened quickly, about a second and a half. The threads had just started moving when I noticed a change. I hastily looked up only to feel my heart drop. Oh! All 15 Orohimiths had their mouths open, their large teeth exposed for me to see. Ah! I stopped and reflexively took a defensive stance. But that proved to be futile on my end. With their mouths open, the Orohimiths' bellies inflated. I realized then what was happening then. But it was already too late. Heek! Their collective screech pierced through the surroundings, heading directly toward me as I stood helplessly in the middle of their screech. Uck! It came fast. Before I knew it, I was hit. I couldn't describe the pain. It felt numbing and it came as fast as it left. But it took my hearing alongside it. Tzzzzzzzzzzzz. A constant buzz echoed within my mind as my balance shifted, and I struggled to keep a footing on the ground. It was at that moment that I saw all the creatures make a move. As if their minds were connected, they all lunged at me from all sorts of angles. I tried to avoid them, but there were simply way too many of them. KH. A sudden, sharp pain jolted through my right leg. As I glanced downwards, a deep wound met my sight. Ah! It took just a second for another one to appear. This time on my shoulder, and I stumbled forward. Uck! Then another. Ugh! And another. Och. And another. Wounds started to pile up on my body. My blood seeped onto the ground, staining it red. I had long stopped screaming as the pain continued to accumulate. Thud. I fell on my knees as I hunched down. I felt my jaw tremble from the pain. It wanted to open it. To scream at the pain that was currently invading every part of my body. But I didn't let it. This much pain wasn't worth screaming over. I looked up. What met my sight was a set of razor-sharp teeth. It was headed straight for my face. That was when I knew I had to make a move. Amidst the silence that took over my mind, I slowly clenched my hand. The threads that I had carefully laid all over the ground sprung up as they grew taut. A sea of blood littered my surroundings, splattering all over my face. EXP plus 0.01%. EXP plus 0.01%. Notifications filled my vision as I cleared my face with my hand. EXP plus 0.01%. EXP plus 0.01%. EXP plus 0.01%. My hair and clothing were a mess as I moved my hand away and splattered the blood onto the ground. Too bad I couldn't hear a thing. When it all calmed down, all I saw were limbs and blood scattered throughout. I looked around me to make sure that there was nothing else around me before finally taking a deep breath and calming down. Extending my hand, I withdrew the threads that were connected across the scattered rocks. Only then did my mind feel clearer, and the weight of the pain hit me. Ha! It was bearable. At least. That was what I told myself. The truth was probably different, but it was something that I had to do. It was the only way I could have envisioned myself winning. While I could have used a Hands of Malady, it wasn't a great skill when facing against 15 different opponents. By the time I incapacitated 2 to 3 Orohemoths, I'd already be out of mana. Such was why I had no choice but to use my body as bait. It hurt. But it worked. Taking a deep breath, I reached out for my bag and took out several ointments which I placed over my wounds. Thankfully, they were merely superficial wounds. A little deep but still manageable. They should heal in a couple of hours. Such was the magic of the ointments of this world. While I waited for my wounds to heal, I reflected on the fight I just had. It was pathetic. I was pathetic. This wasn't the way that I wanted to win. I understood that I was still learning, and that this was merely just the start, but it didn't stop me from feeling frustrated with myself. Simply put, my control was still not there yet. Because of that, I needed to make sure my attacks landed in one hit. I couldn't afford to just graze them. I paused and blinked. A thought suddenly struck me. What if I combine Etherweave with my spells? Emotive? Hands of Malady. The moment the thought entered my mind, it didn't leave it. It just remained there and continued to repeat itself. Over and over again. At that, I had no choice but to give in to my desires. I brought my hand forward where a thread slowly moved out from my forearm, coiling around my middle finger. A purple magic circle soon manifested over my hand. It hovered around it before shrinking down. Typically, it would trace a downward path, enveloping my entire hand and casting it in a purple hue. This time, however, I changed things up. I focused my intent away from my hand and toward the thread. The circle shrinked and moved down my finger. Sweat started to accumulate down the side of my face as I focused my attention on the circle hovering over my finger. It gradually inched closer down, reaching the tip of my finger. Then, my heart sped at the sight before me. It was hard to see given how thin the thread was, but it was gradually turning purple. My eyes widened at the sight. Can it really? I felt my heart beat faster than before. I felt a strange sense of excitement and nervously swallowed my saliva. The circle inched further down. It was now halfway down my finger. The thread turned purple for each part the circle passed. Even more sweat trickled down the side of my face as I maximized my focus. I was close. Southwest, very close. And just as the circle continued to move down, I suddenly frowned. The magic circle stopped. No. I voluntarily shattered the circle. That was because I realized I was doing things wrong. I stood there in silence to collect my breath and mana again. Then, I extended my hand forward and a magic circle again formed. Just like last time, it shrunk and hovered over my middle finger. This time, I didn't let it move down. Rather, swoosh. I guided the thread out and into the magic circle. As expected, the thread changed color and my mana expenditure significantly reduced. Not only that, but so did my amount of concentration. I stared at the purple thread before me. Now this. It was certainly something. The mirror dimension was vast. It covered a massive expanse of land, its size rivaling, if not surpassing, those of the entire empire, which itself occupied a substantial portion of the world. The Black region was regarded as the smallest among all the regions. Considering the difficulty in conquering even a small portion of this dimension, its status as the smallest seemed only fitting. Typically, when entering the Black region, most cadets jumped at the opportunity to go toward the more dangerous regions. Such was the best place to train. However, there were a few who preferred to start in the lowest zone to get accustomed to the environment and monsters. Swoosh. Ah, fucking hell. Kira was one such cadet. Staring at the numerous burning corpses in front of her, she pressed her finger against her ear. It was still ringing. Fuck, I can't hear shit. No, she could, but it was just a constant ring. The more it continued, the more she got annoyed. Especially when she noticed two more headed her way. TSK. How much do these fuckers reproduce? They're endless. A red magic circle hovered over her hand as the two creatures caught fire in the distance. They shrieked in pain, but Kira had none of that. Ack, fuck. Is that how it is? Are you all so good at screaming because you mate so much? Just when she thought she was done, another one appeared. Her eyes widened. My word. They really can't stop fucking. In the end, after dispatching the creature, she decided to leave. The creatures, while easy, were hard to handle when in groups of more than 5. She doubted anyone would have a hard time handling them en masse. Packing up her staff, she slung her bag over her shoulder and headed out toward the next region. The route wasn't far. It was about an hour's walk according to the map. She was halfway there when she suddenly paused. From the peripheral of her eyes, she caught something in the distance. Something felt off. No, it was off. Her head turned to face the distance, and her expression finally changed. What is? Her eyes widened considerably, and her bag fell on the floor. Thud. Off into the distance, she could see the mutilated bodies of over several dozen Aurorahemathas. The same creatures she struggled to deal with just moments prior. What sort of? She jogged over to carefully analyze the situation. Her surprise increased as she noticed how cleanly they had been killed. A sword. An arrow. For the cuts to be so clean. Leon. A name popped up in her mind. He appeared to be the only person capable of such a feat. Kira meticulously examined the corpses in front of her. Just as she was looking around, her eyes froze on a specific area. This. A shoulder pad. It looked to have fallen off during the exchange, and most likely belonged to the one responsible for all of this. Staring at it for a good minute, she quietly pocketed the pad. Her curiosity suddenly piqued. Who did this? 3 days passed in a blur. It was the day of the appointment and Leon, and the other members were already waiting in Zone F. So this is the F zone. Evelyn looked around with wide eyes. In their view lay a luminescent forest, emitting a deep blue glow that starkly contrasted with the dull grayness of the surrounding world. In a sense, it added to the ominousness of the area. Bordering next to the yellow region, it was the most dangerous zone within the black region. Leon looked around before turning back to look at the others. Be careful. Do not stray too far. I can sense multiple strong presences deep within. Your senses are that sharp? Aoife asked while she leaned on a nearby tree. She closed her eyes and tried to sense her surroundings, but after a while frowned and shook her head. I can't sense anything. I'm a knight. That's why. I am too. Aoife didn't seem to be satisfied with the answer but left it there. There was a fundamental difference between those that belonged to the body category and those that belonged to the mind and elemental category. To be classified as a knight, one had to belong to the body category, which focused on enhancing the human body. Aoife was proficient in both mind and body. However, unlike him, she focused most of her attention on telekinesis, which belonged to the mind category. It was understandable that his senses were sharper than hers. After all, his only talents lay in the body category. Isn't he late? How much longer are we supposed to wait for him? A voice suddenly broke Leon out of his thoughts. When he looked back, Wesley, who was similarly leaning against a nearby tree, frowned. It's been an hour since we arrived here, and he's still not here. Are we sure he's coming? Leon frowned but still answered. He should be coming. Ah well, if you say so. Leon thought he'd leave it at that, but he suddenly continued. You don't think anything happened to him on the way? I mean, he did go by himself. And like I said, he's not very strong. It wouldn't be out of the question. What if he got hurt and can't make it? How much longer should we wait for? He talks too much. It was starting to become more and more apparent to Leon. This hadn't been the first remark he had made toward Julian. For the past 3 days, he had been throwing random jabs at him. Nobody said a thing considering that they were a group, and none of the group members had anything to say about him. But it was starting to grow on Leon's nerves. You see. Russell. A gentle rustle halted Leon mid-sentence as he turned his head in the direction of where the sound came from. Then, a figure slowly emerged from the other side of the trees. This. Ah. The moment he appeared, the expressions of all those present changed. This was especially so for Wesley, who couldn't help but cover his mouth. PFTT. A weird mixture of expressions greeted my sight the moment I managed to clear the forest and arrive at the meeting area. I couldn't blame them. While I wasn't injured, my clothes were a mess with tears all over the place. Dry blood stained my attire, adding to the disarray. I had been so immersed in my training that I had almost forgotten about the meeting. Thankfully, I managed to make it in time. PFTT. A certain sound caught my attention, and when I looked up, I found someone staring at with me a look of mockery. Who is this guy? With long black hair, hazel eyes, and handsome features, he appeared somewhat familiar, but I couldn't quite put it where. You're here. My attention shifted away when I noticed Leon approach me. He sported a small frown on his face, but didn't say anything about my clothing and started to brief me on the situation. Near here there's an infernal nest. I raised my brow. Nixfernal nest? Having studied the books before coming here, I was well learned on nixfernals. They were an underground creature that loved to dig tunnels. Highly toxic and nimble with sharp claws, they were monsters that the Academy recommended avoiding. So why was he telling me this? I've already scouted the area beforehand, and there's only one junior ranked one. The rest are infant ranked. And within the nest, there is a handful of lumicore fungi. Ah. It may not be useful for you, but it can fetch a high price if you were to sell it on the market. If you help us, we will give you a share of the gains. I didn't answer immediately. Staring into Leon's eyes for a brief moment, I proceeded to lower my head. Lumicore fungi. I knew about them. They weren't exactly useful for me. They were resources more fit for those who practiced the body category. However, that didn't mean they were worthless. No, rather, they were worth a lot of money. I wasn't sure exactly how much, but each gram was worth at least multiple dozen rand. I was in desperate need of money. To become stronger faster, I needed more resources. Money was the key to gaining access to such resources. I had no other choice but to accept. And when my thoughts paused there, I looked up to Leon and nodded. All right. I'll accept. Just briefly, I noticed Leon's lips pull up slightly. But it left as fast as it came, and I had a hard time figuring out whether I had seen it wrongly or not. In the end, I let it be. Get ready. We will be leaving soon. Asterisk. Located deep into the F zone was a certain web of tunnels that one could enter from a few spots above. Somewhat familiar with the area, Leon guided us toward a dark cave that one couldn't see the end of. Is this the place? Luxon glanced around with a frown. Do we have some light? Or do you dash? There's no need. Leon casually looked back before stepping in. You'll see once we reach deeper inside. His figure disappeared into the cave. Aoife followed right after him. Though confused, Luxon sighed and followed right after. I was just about to follow when someone turned to face me. He appeared friendly. Make sure you stay behind me. I have no idea why Leon wanted you to come, but... He lowered his head to scan my body. I can protect you if you stay behind me. Since you seem to be struggling so much, I thought it'd be best if you stayed with me. I'm a sharpshooter, so I've got great eyesight. What is this guy? If you stay next to me, you won't get in the way of others and might even be able to contribute. Every word that he spat was spat with a friendly smile, and yet all I felt was a strange sense of disgust. I was just about to respond to him when he turned around and entered the cave. Just make sure you listen to me. It'll do all of us good. I stood in silence for a short moment before lowering my head to stare at my hand. Struggling. Might be able to contribute. This? Ha! I almost laughed. What sort of situation was this? I wasn't even mad. I was just baffled. He couldn't even hide his own dislike towards me. I shook my head. I had thought people would finally leave me alone after what I had done, but there were still a few who were not convinced. Most likely, he had some basis behind his confidence. Given that I could somewhat recognize him, he must have had some strength to back up his confidence. Still. What a pain. Just when was it going to be enough? Scratching the side of my head, I entered the cave and embraced the darkness. I had just taken several steps when I stopped. The air was thick with the scent of earth and dampness, and the sound of dripping water echoed softly in the distance. However, off in the distance I took notice of a strange glow. I didn't hesitate to follow the light, and soon enough I was left shocked by the sight that greeted me. Covering the walls and ceiling of the cave was an unusual blue moss, emitting a soft glow that illuminated the entire cavern. Wow! It looked like a scene straight out of a movie, and I had to take a moment to observe the area. Julian. I only looked away when I felt someone call my name. Looking up, I saw everyone looking at me. I briefly paused my gaze on the black-haired kid before turning it back to Leon, who pressed his hand against his mouth and nudged me forward. We're near the nest, so be careful. If you... Boom. The cavern shook all of a sudden. Unable to keep it steady, I lost my footing and fell against the ground. I was the only one that fell, as almost everyone was able to keep their footing. Heek. Someone else did fall on me as my vision was covered by a set of purple hair. The moment she fell on me, I felt her body turn rigid and our eyes met. I hardly reacted given that I knew that this was an accident, but she didn't think so as her eyes darted all over the place but me. Then, just as she was about to say something, I caught sight of a massive figure headed in our direction from the distance, and I pushed her off of me. A tremendous pressure that made it hard to breathe emitted from the creature's body as I tried to get my bearings. Just as I was about to move forward, a hand pushed me back. "Don't interfere. Get ready." Leon's voice reached me shortly after. With his glowing sword, he pushed his feet forward and dashed forward. His figure blurred forward as it headed toward the distant creature. Following him right behind was Aoife, who was just a tad bit slower. The others also got into position as they readied themselves to face the creature. I was the only one who did nothing as I met a pair of hazel eyes. "We discussed it before, right? Stay with me so that we don't interfere with them." Just then, I deeply stared into his eyes. He met them back, as if he was trying to challenge me. However, that didn't last for long. He soon started to grow uncomfortable with my gaze. So much that his eyes started to dart away from me. I kept at it until he couldn't bear it anymore and finally looked away. I knew then the reasoning behind his attitude. He was afraid of me. He was afraid of me. Was that the case? I thought so at first, but surely that couldn't be the only reason for his hatred and dislike towards me. There had to be something else. Thinking things through, I realized that I hadn't exactly been the friendliest of people. I tended to mind my own business and avoided interacting with others. It was mainly so that my cover wouldn't be blown, but at the same time because I didn't want to get attached to anyone. But still, for him to be afraid of me, there had to be a more concrete reason. Boom. The cave shook as Leon's sword came into contact with Nyxfernal, a large creature with a stout body and thick, fur-covered form. Its sharp claws gleamed under the light from the moss as its small, beady eyes fiercely glared at us. Upon coming into contact with the Nyxfernal, Leon's sword ricocheted back. Just as he was about to lose balance, Aoife raised her hand, and his body halted midair. "Thanks." She followed up with another wave, stopping the beast's claws from slashing at him. "Gotcha." Lightning burst from out of nowhere, landing on the Nyxfernal thick fur. Evelyn, who stood by the side, held both hands forward as her uniform and hair fluttered. But that too seemed like a futile attempt as Evelyn let out a small curse. "Shit. Let me." A figure rushed the creature. His speed was fast, and within moments, he appeared right beneath the creature's body. Two magic circles formed around his fists, as he punched out with everything he had. But clank. Even that seemed like a meaningless attempt as his fists stopped right after making contact with the creature's underbelly. Luxon immediately panicked as he looked behind. "Shit, Aoife. Save me." Just as he said those words, the Nyxfernal's body flexed, and its tail swung right at Luxon, who crossed his arms to brace for impact. Thankfully, Aoife was quick enough to react as she pulled him back just in time to avoid the attack. Bang! The cave shook even more fiercely as Luxon skidded several meters back. "Ha! Ha! Thanks. Try again." With cold focus, Aoife lifted her palm and continued to support from behind. She wasn't the only one supporting. Shio! An arrow flew at fast speeds, hitting the tough fur of the Nyxfernal. Sparks flew, but nothing came out of it. Aoife frowned and turned her head slightly. "Aim for its eyes." "Got it." He pulled the string of the bow back and prepared to attack again. I stood quietly beside him. Until this moment, I remained standing without doing a single thing. I had no business interfering. I knew the extent of my skills. There wasn't much I could do. At least, not yet. I closed my eyes and extended the threads towards the ground, splitting them in 3. I looked around to locate the best area to set them up. Boom. I ignored the chaos around me and guided the threads carefully around the walls of the cave. My head twitched as I felt a sharp pain. However, I ignored the pain and continued to guide the threads around the walls of the cave. I was waiting for the right time to act. 4. I felt a sudden vibration and opened my eyes. What? There was something odd about the vibration. It wasn't coming from the Nyxfernal in the distance. It was coming from somewhere else. Beneath. I looked down. It was then that it happened. Something exploded from beneath me and the ground split. The area it covered was small, and it was right beneath where I stood. The footing I held disappeared, and my body jolted with a weird sensation as gravity started to pull me down from beneath. In that split second, I felt the world around me slow down. I managed to catch a glimpse of everything around me. From the changing expressions of Leon, Evelyn, Aoife, Luxon, to the look of panic on Wesley's face as he fell alongside me. I caught all of it in my mind before everything turned dark. The last thing I remembered was recalling the threads and creating new ones. Julian. It all happened so fast that nobody was able to react on time. Boom. All Leon felt was a subtle trembling of the ground behind. When he turned his head, he caught a glimpse of Julian. As usual, he seemed unperturbed. Even as the ground beneath him quaked, he stood with a frown. As if this had nothing to do with him. Or maybe things had happened too fast for him to react. Even so. His figure, alongside Wesley's, disappeared from their sight. Ah! He could hardly make a sound before his ear detected an odd whistling noise heading right in his direction. Instinctively, he moved back and just barely managed to avoid the tail of the Nyxfernal. Bang! Get a grip! A cold voice echoed beside him. When he looked, he saw Aoife staring at the monster with a tight frown. I know you're his knight, but you need to focus on the monster in front of us. We can look for them later. They should be Her words halted and she raised both her hands. Leon looked at the creature, which stopped mid-motion before nodding his head. She was right. There was no point in thinking about Julian. He was going to be fine. There was no way his instincts would lie to him. He was definitely fine. I opened my eyes. Darkness embraced my vision as my head throbbed. I hung suspended in the air as the threads kept me in place. Where am I? I looked up. There was hardly any light. It seemed like I had fallen into a deep hole. I closed my eyes and felt the threads. There were a total of 2 left. The other one had snapped. I focused on creating another one and safely planted it into a crack on the wall. I tried pulling myself up, but that seemed to be impossible given my current abilities. The threads were still fragile. It was already a miracle that I was safe. Looks like I have no choice but to go down. It was the only thing I could do. In the darkness, I slowly and carefully extended the threads, guiding my body toward the bottom of the hole. I thought back on the situation and frowned. There was someone who had fallen with me. What had happened to him? Had he died? Or was he still alive? I pursed my lips and continued to guide myself down, until I eventually felt my feet touch a surface. Thud. The air felt damp and a still silence filled my surroundings. A strange tension lingered over my surroundings as I felt my muscles tense and my skin grow cold. I took a quiet breath and took out my bag, where I reached for my torch. A pair of eyes immediately greeted my sight the moment I lit up the torch, and my heart almost stopped. Thankfully, I was able to keep myself composed. I was somewhat used to fear. Took you long enough. A familiar voice reached my ears, and when I got a better look, I stood frozen by the sight that bore before me. The only thing I could recognize were his hazel eyes. Everything else was different. The contours of the face were distorted, with areas of puckered flesh. The color was uneven, ranging from red to mottled shades of brown and gray. What had happened to him? You're alive. That was all I managed to utter in the end. He smiled then. What's with your expression, Fekta? Are you mad at how I told you to stick close to me? I had to do it. You didn't pick up any of my messages. We're supposed to start soon. Fekta. Message. Start soon. I felt my blood grow cold and my fingers twitched. No, this. All of a sudden, an idea sprouted in my mind. This isn't the first time you've seen my face. But right, yeah. His expression twisted slightly. I guess you were disgusted by the way I looked. You made that pretty clear back then when you beat me up. A lot of things started to click in my mind all of a sudden. The reason for his fear, and his antagonism towards me. This. Why aren't you speaking? You were rather vocal back at the camp when you killed your way to the top. I'm supposed to be following your orders, but you went and outdid yourself, didn't you? His eerie smile stuck right close to me. His hazel eyes turned, and I felt the back of my neck tingle as my heart started to beat faster. Slowly my head lowered, and my eyes fell on his forearm. His clothes were ripped so I could see it well. However, much to my shock, I saw nothing. As if noticing my actions, he frowned and followed my line of sight. What are you doing? Why are you? He stopped and looked at me. His expression changed all of a sudden. But it was too late. In that split second, my threads were already at his throat. Before he could even react, I clenched my hand as a fountain of red sprayed on me. PFTTT. The scent of iron lingered in the air as I felt my face grow wet. I took several steps back. My stomach churned and I hastily closed my eyes. Thud. Ha. I had to do it. I repeated such thoughts in my mind. It hardly worked as my stomach continued to churn, but it didn't stop me from repeating it. I had to do it. It was either me or him. That much I knew. My thoughts were further confirmed the moment I opened my eyes again, and my gaze once again fell on his forearm. The once clean forearm suddenly changed as a black clover appeared. I knew then that my guesses had been right, and I turned to stare at the tattoo on my arm. What is the meaning of this? New pieces of information entered my mind. Pekta? Camp? What sort of situation was this? I thought about keeping the conversation going to get more information, but I realized it was a stupid idea. I knew nothing about the organization. A simple slip-up and he would have noticed that I wasn't Julian. What would happen to me then? I didn't care to find out and acted swiftly. His guard was down, and his attention was away from his surroundings. All it took was a simple moment. While I didn't expect him to be helpless against my attack, I was still ready for any counter he might have made. His death seemed surprising. Perhaps he really didn't think I would kill him. Is there some sort of harsh rule that forces members to not kill each other? Is that why his guard was so down? If not for that, I didn't think I would have been able to kill him so easily. Still, his death only brought more questions. There was also the fact that I had to deal with the aftermath of this. Thankfully, I was the only one aware of Etherwave. I could place the blame for his death on the monsters here. Perhaps even hide the traces of the threads. My mind continued to spin in the silence as I forced myself to look at the headless body in front of me. I took a deep breath and looked at my forearm. Or more specifically, toward the second leaf. It was once again shining. He may not be alive, but there was a way for me to find more information. I pursed my lips and quietly looked up. I didn't want to do it. I hated the sensation that came with understanding another's emotions. But I had to do it. To get some clues. I had to do it. I have to. I lowered my hand and placed it over his body. That's when I pressed the leaf and my world darkened. A large mansion. A familiar feeling washed over me. Yet again, I felt present but at the same time not. I could see and move, but I wasn't. Here. Will I be able to gain anything? I looked around me. The place was finely decorated with furniture and paintings all over. Clearly, whoever lived here was rather well off. I focused my attention on one of the paintings hanging by the wall. A family of 4. 2 adults and 2 kids. 2 males and 2 females. Are these the owners of the mansion? Help. It was then that I heard it. A young voice. One that seemed to belong to a child. Crackle. I can't breathe. Flames engulfed the surroundings. Be rather. I can't breathe. 2 children huddled by the corner of the room. They stared at the raging flames in fear. I felt a familiar sensation as information flooded my mind. A high-class family. One that was highly respected within the empire. The 2 children in the room were the sole heirs of the estate. 1 year older than the girl, the boy was the older brother. In these raging flames, Mom and Dad will come. His instincts took over and he protected the girl. It hurts. It hurts. The sister cowered in his arms. Don't worry, Mom and Dad are coming. Just wait a little. Though he said that, the boy didn't seem sure. I felt every emotion he felt. He was primarily dominated by fear, but he did his best to keep himself from showing it. For the sake of his sister. I'm going to protect you. He was prepared to push away his fears. Crackle. Awk. But the flames continued to rage on. It hurts. Be brother. Stay behind me. He covered her with his arms. The heat of the fire burned him. He was just 8 years old and yet. He understood his duty all too well. I stared blankly at the scene in front of me. The scene hit harder than I thought it would. It reminded me a lot of myself. No, it was a perfect reflection of what I tried to be. But I ran away from my duty. Ha! My chest tumbled as it was pierced by an all too familiar pain. Eli. Emily. A voice broke me out of my thoughts. In the distance, a figure appeared. Her appearance was haggard and she seemed to be in distress. Crackle. The flames continued to burn. But amidst the flames, the faces of the 2 children lit up. She's finally here. Just in time. Mommy. The children hastily stood up to head to where their mother was. But. Bang. Ah. The ceiling fell apart and the fire spread. Eli. Emily. The mother's scream echoed within the sea of flames as the 2 children ducked down in fear. It hurts. I don't want to die. Mommy. Daddy. Save us. Their voices entered my consciousness as they held their heads. Please save me. Mom. I'm scared. I'm so scared. The fire intensified and the walls burned. The crackling of the fire echoed. The roof collapsed inwards. Embers scattered in all directions and smoke covered everything. Cough. Cough. In the struggle, the pair of siblings held each other. As if they were the only thing left to rely on. Bang. Bang. The structure started to collapse. All hope seemed to have been lost when. Grab my hand. A hand reached out from behind the flames. The faces of their mother appeared from behind. Grab it. Mom. Mom. Hope ignited within the children's minds as they reached for the outstretched hand. They both reached for it at the same time, but only one hand grasped the outstretched hand. The boy stared at his mother who was looking at him with open eyes. The arm pulled back and he felt his sister disappear. Crackle. Shortly after, the flames fully engulfed his vision, flooding his body with intense pain. But the only thing that the boy could think about was his mother. It hurts. Mom. Where are you? He waited for her. I'm here. Are you coming back? Mom. For her hand to reach out for him again. But it never did. Even as he felt his entire body burn. The hope. It still lingered and I felt it. But it never came. LVL2. Anger EXP plus 3%. Darkness took over from then. Only for it to be shattered shortly after as the heat that had been invading every part of the child's body disappeared, and he felt someone's presence. Mommy. Had she finally come? A sense of relief washed over the child's body as the darkness embraced his consciousness. That sense of relief was short-lived, however. Wake up. A voice brought the young boy back. It was a rough and detached voice. When his eyes opened again, the boy found himself inside a large cave. He wasn't alone. There were several other children around him. All of them huddled together, scared. Mom? He called for his mother, but she was nowhere to be seen. Forget about all you've known. Your identity no longer matters. If you want freedom, then you've got to earn it. The man smiled. It was a smile that seemed warm to those looking. But it was also the same smile that forced the children to starvation. Work harder. He was a total bastard. You didn't work enough. You won't be eating today. No. I'm hungry. I will work harder. Please. Just a little bit. Shut up. Ah. Even as the children's cheeks sunk in due to the hunger, he didn't care. For the inverted sky. Pray. A fanatic. Not enough. A lunatic who enjoyed torturing the little children. You useless things. You won't be of use at this rate. Starving them. I am useless. Brainwashing them. It hurts. It hurts. But it's for the inverted sky. I'm hungry. That was who he was. All is for the inverted sky. The children gradually forgot about the pain and hunger. Even as they passed out due to starvation and pain, the only thing they muttered was, for the inverted sky. It was as if their lives were no longer important. I watched this happen over and over again. Thousands of children came and went. By the end, all that was left were mindless puppets who only believed in one thing. Long live the inverted sky. Their identity had been stripped. So had their humanity. The only thing left was their voice. H hungry. H hurts. But even that was starting to fade. Only one child hadn't lost his voice. In the silence, I approached him. Hurts. Hungry. Mom. Even now, he clung to the past. To his mother who had left him in the flames. Gradually my steps stopped and he turned his head. A familiar burned visage. His eyes, though innocent, carried a certain clarity to them as they looked at me. You're not Julian. I closed my eyes before nodding. I am not. The child nodded his head as if understanding the situation. He looked around him. These were memories I had long forgotten. I listened in silence. My memories of my family are rather fuzzy. How are they doing right now? Are they healthy? Is my sister okay? Do they still think about me? His face suddenly changed, and I felt my jaw clench. You saw my memories, right? How I got my face. The way he was looking at me. It made my skin crawl. That hand. His head tilted and I felt my breath stop. A variety of emotions flooded my chest all of a sudden. But primarily, was it for me or my sister? All I felt was anger. A strange suffocating feeling overtook me as my chest grew heavy. You've seen her face. Who was the one she was trying to save? His face remained stoic and unchanging, but his anger didn't. It boiled even more ferociously. Was it because she reached faster than me? Was that it? What would have happened had I reached for the hand first? My chest felt like it was ripping apart as his eyes remained glued to me. Would she have taken my place? Or would I still have been discarded? He disappeared right then as the world turned dark. But even then, his face didn't. It remained stuck in my mind. His voice whispering at the back of my mind. Who was she trying to save? Me? Or her? In the end. LVL1. Anger EXP plus 13%. I was never able to answer his question. But I had no time to dwell on the question. The moment I regained my vision, I was met with a dozen different eyes staring in my direction from the distance. I knew then that my path was blocked. But I didn't care. I brought my hand forward where 5 threads slowly came out. A purple magic circle floated above as the threads changed color. Then, staring at the incoming creatures, I clenched my hand. Swoosh. Do you think they're waiting for us down there? Evelyn's voice echoed through the empty tunnels, mingling with the sound of their footsteps as they rushed towards the hole up ahead. She was the furthest one back as Leon led the group from the front. His expression was hard to read. However, it was clear that he was concerned. I don't know. Leon shook his head. It had been just a minute since they had managed to defeat the junior-ranked Nyxfernal. They held off on collecting the fungi and directly headed down the hole to search for Julian and Wesley. Thud. Thud. The moment they touched the ground, all they were met with was darkness. The air was moist and a putrid smell lingered in the air. Ugh! What is this smell? The smell was so horrid that Evelyn had to cover her nose to prevent herself from gagging. Though she didn't show it directly, Aoife also appeared to dislike it as her nose wrinkled. Drip. Drip. There was a faint rippling sound in the distance that caught everyone's attention. It shattered the silence that gripped the surroundings. Without hesitation, Leon reached out for his bag to take out his torch. He wanted to get a better look at his surroundings. And when the light finally shined, he froze. So did everybody else. Ah! Looking at the corpses that were littered on the floor, Leon's head slowly raised to stare at the person sitting on top of them. Drenched from head to toe with blood, his figure twitched the moment light shined upon him. Then, his head slowly raised to stare at them, and his hoarse voice echoed. You're here. Hey, why did you sto? Evelyn almost bumped into Leon's body as she swiftly stepped to the left in time. She was just about to complain when she found herself stopping at the sight that greeted her eyes. Ah, this. Aoife, Luxon, and the others followed shortly after. They too wore similar expressions. You did this. The one who seemed to be in the most shock was Luxon, who looked at the corpses littered on the ground in shock. While they weren't exactly strong monsters, judging from the aura they gave off, there were still a lot of them. Even he felt that it would be difficult for all of them to handle these many of them at once. So for him to be able to do it all by himself. How? He found that hard to believe. But such was the reality of the situation as Julian calmly stood up from his spot to brush his clothes which were covered in blood. A strange silence gripped the surroundings as all eyes fell on him. That was until... Ah! Evelyn's shout brought everyone back. What? What's going on? The first to react was Luxon, who looked at her with a frown. She was looking toward the distance with wide-open eyes as she pointed toward a certain area. That. From there, everyone could see what she was pointing at, and their expressions shifted once more. Weasley. A headless corpse. One that wore a distinctive uniform that could only belong to those who belonged to the Haven Institute. Almost immediately, all eyes fell on the figure that stood in the middle. He seemed completely nonchalant about the situation. His eyes weren't even on the corpse or them. It was his behavior that made all of them grow wary as a sudden thought crossed their minds. What if Julian. Leon was the first to call him out. Of everyone present, he was the only one who didn't jump to conclusions. What happened? Finally, Julian's head turned and their gazes met. As if he understood what he was talking about, he slowly answered. He died. I can see that. Leon slowly blinked. How did he die? Did you? No. Shaking his head, Julian pointed toward a certain direction. Following his line of sight, Leon's eyes jumped up. It was there that he managed to catch a glimpse of a severed head. One that was badly burned. I wasn't the one who killed him. I'm not capable of doing that. No, that makes no sense. Aoife cut the conversation short as she moved towards the severed head. She closely examined it before turning to look at Julian with a frown. These scars. They're obviously healed. Julian calmly stared at her for a short moment before turning to look at the severed head. For the briefest of moments, Leon saw Julian's face contort. However, he was quick to hide it. Possibly. I didn't have the time to check. Right. Aoife glanced at the surroundings briefly before nodding. She didn't seem too convinced but accepted the explanation. Especially when considering how differently the monsters had been slain compared to the corpse. He could have perhaps done that on purpose, but there was no denying the burned-up face before them. Julian. He wasn't capable of doing such a thing. And with such thoughts, Aoife looked at Leon, who looked back at her. For now, let's head back. We'll report this to the Institute. They'll do the investigating. Okay. Leon readily agreed and turned his attention away from Julian. The same was true for the others who looked anywhere but his direction. There was something about his current demeanor that threw them all off. His eyes especially. They were cold. Almost detached. But within them, they could feel a certain rage that they didn't want to address. They felt maddening. Please come with us. We will need to detain you until we manage to get a clear understanding of the situation. I understand. The moment we returned from the cave and the situation was reported, I was immediately brought away by the Academy security. I didn't complain and obliged. Please place your hand over the orb. Understood. Test results. 1.897. Mana density. Tainted. As I continued to undergo testing, a familiar set of results appeared in front of me. This pattern persisted for several hours until I was finally led to a small room furnished with a wooden desk and chair. Someone will come in shortly. Make yourself comfortable in the meantime. I sat down and closed my eyes. The lingering traces of the anger I had perceived from the vision began to fade, and I started to feel normal again. I was confident in my chances of making it out without any problems. I didn't use curse magic when dealing with Wesley. Had I used it, there would have been a strong chance his death would have been linked to me. But there wasn't. I made sure that to be the case. It was likely that the Academy would attribute his death to one of the monsters. Ha! But that wasn't the only thing they'd be worried about. The fact that his true face had been revealed probably was what the Academy was investigating. They probably didn't care about his death as much as his real identity. I couldn't blame them. After all, he had managed to sneak in right under their noses. It made me think deeply about the organization I was dealing with and their strength. Surely, an organization that could sneak in spies in such a prestigious institute had to be extremely powerful. Several times more than the institute itself. The inverted sky was what they called themselves. At least, from what I had managed to glimpse from the memories. They appeared to be a group of fanatics who kidnapped young children to brainwash them. Even now, thinking about what I had seen, my stomach churned in disgust. Evil bastards. The memories of the vision remained glued to my mind. Constantly reminded of what I had seen, and just what atrocities they had committed. There were a lot of things that I had managed to learn from the vision. However, what bothered me the most was the fact that Julian was part of this very organization. And he wasn't simply a small member. Fekta. Such was the name I was referred to back in the cave. What did it mean, and what did it signify? I wasn't exactly sure, but I knew that it meant a rather important position. I sat in silence staring at the empty desk before me as I felt my back tense. They're probably going to come for me soon. Wesley and I were supposed to carry a mission. The fact that he had died and I was present was rather suspicious. However, I knew the moment that I was part of this organization that there was no point in trying too hard to make it seem as though it was an accident and that I wasn't involved. They weren't stupid. I was sure they knew I was in some way involved in his death. Tap. 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 I drummed my fingers over the wooden desk. But it's not exactly a bad position. This situation. I could make use of it. Within this area where the Institute's discipline was upheld, several school board members tasked with administering disciplinary measures for the cadets were present. The accused sat on the other side of the invisible glass, awaiting his judgment. He sat quietly behind a desk with a calm face. Julian Dacre Ivinus. The Black Star. The accused name and title were read out to the members of the room. How deeply is he involved in this matter? The disciplinary elder, a rough man with a thick frame and bald head, stood at the center of the formation. Besides him, a young man who appeared to still be a cadet held up a piece of paper as he spoke. The results have come back negative. The likelihood of him being the culprit is unlikely. There are no traces of curse magic, and given how cleanly the head had been severed, it is also unlikely to be done by a magician. The biopsy suggests that it's more likely a monster who did it. Right. The elder had also read the biopsy, and after having observed the corpse, he also believed that to be the case. However, there was something off about the situation. Something simply didn't add up. He eventually turned his head toward his right, where a woman sat. She had been silent the entire time, and her attention had been on Julian from the start. Chancellor. He called out to her. Only then did she turn her head to meet his gaze. The elder felt his breath leave his body the moment their gazes met, as an intense pressure bore down on him. Thankfully, as a high wizard, he was able to remain composed. Forcing those feelings down, he managed to ask. What do you think about the situation? A strange silence filled the room shortly after he asked that question. With her gaze lingering over him for the briefest of moments, she turned her attention back to Julian, who seemed to have felt their gazes as he lifted his head. Then, with a slight tug of her lips, she leaned her cheek on her propped-up fist. I wonder.